Hey, if you're new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me, and honestly, it'd make my day. If you already did, thank you so much. Oh, and by the way, if you like listening to fan fiction, check out my other channel. The link's in the description.
Chimera Luffy by mellra. What if Luffy ate a different devil's fruit as a child? Not just any fruit, but the most powerful of the Zoan fruits, the Chimera fruit. It is a legendary Zoan fruit that allows the user to take on the forms of any Zoan fruit users, as well as a true form as the mythical Chimera. How will this change the course of the One Piece world? Pairing most likely Luffy/Boa Hancock, adios.
The Straw Hats all enjoyed the breakneck ride down Reverse Mountain, the wind blowing past them as they continued to pick up speed as they went. The water sprayed everywhere, creating more mist. The entire crew was shouting in joy, obviously loving every minute of it. Downwards they sped, almost as if they were on a waterslide, breaking through the clouds so that they couldn't see anything but the white fog in front of them. All five were laughing, sounding as if they didn't have a care in the world, but then Zoro was shouting out, "Did you just hear something?" "Huh, what's that?" Nami yelled over at him as the Straw Hats stopped laughing long enough to hear them. "That groaning sound." Zoro shouted out, "Didn't you hear it?" It was probably just the wind. She dismissed at him as they started to go even faster. At this speed, everything sounds distorted. But then they heard it, a distant wailing that sounded like a foghorn had come through the clouds. Usopp began to look through his goggles to try and find that answer as well. "Nami," screamed Sanji from the mast, "I see a mountain up ahead." "What? That's impossible." Nami yelled up at him in panic. "But it's right there," Sanji screamed back as he pointed in front of them, "I can see it." "Who cares?" Luffy yelled from the Mary's head, and it was obvious that he couldn't have cared less to what might happen. "Go." Nami began to scream that they should be home free after they passed the Twin Capes. But then that groaning wail sounded off once again, louder than ever so that no one could deny that they didn't hear it. Luffy was now trying to squint his eyes through the thick fog, trying to make something out. Just then, they broke through the white sheet and all that could be seen was a vast navy blue, almost black, which caused the five Straw Hats to scream in shock. "It's a black wall!" Luffy screamed in fear. "No, it's not," Nami shouted in horror as she grabbed hold of the railing, tears in her eyes. "Then what is it?" Zoro yelled before she could finish. "It's a whale!" Usopp screamed. To say that this whale was enormous would be the understatement of the century. In front of them was a magnificent creature that was so large, it looked like it could swallow an entire island in one gulp. The whale's massive mouth opened a little so that they could see the row of sharp teeth, and a single tooth about the size of the Mary, if not bigger, and his great head was also covered in dozens of scars, both old and new. But unaware of what was going on around him, the whale wailed out once again, the loudest one yet. That made the entire mountain shake. They all covered their ears. The noise piercing their brains and their eardrums felt as if they were about to burst. The Straw Hats, however, were all screaming in a panic. What are we gonna do?" Usopp screamed out, looking ready to faint as he stared at them all, desperate that one of them had a plan here. "Should we fight?" Luffy suggested quickly. "Idiot, how are we supposed to fight a 100-ton whale?" Nami demanded hysterically. "Well, do something!" Usopp screamed at them both. "Our path is blocked, how do we escape?" "Calm down," Sanji yelled, though he too sounded close to losing his mind in blind fear. "If this creature looks like a giant wall to us, we must be a speck." Zoro yelled out that it wouldn't matter if they were small to him because they were going to crash right into him unless they changed course. "Look," he then shouted, pointing to the Titan's side where there was an opening, "we can get by on the left, port, hard to port." "The rudder's broken," Usopp reminded him loudly. "Do something for Pete's sake," Zoro yelled, and it was strange to see him lose control of his calm like this. "Anything." "Wait, I know," Luffy yelled as he jumped off the figurehead and headed straight down to the hull. "This'll work, it has to." Nami yelled after him what he was up to, but he didn't stick around to answer as he disappeared through the front of the ship. The other three men went and tried to pull what was left of the rudder to the left. "This is pointless," Usopp yelled as the other two cursed, "the ship's not gonna turn." Just as they had almost reached Laboon, Below deck there was an enormous blast which could only mean one thing. The cannon? They screamed. The impact of the blast shot the ship back slightly and blew up in front of them once it hit the whale. The cannon had stopped them from crashing right into the whale and being destroyed, but it wasn't enough to stop them completely. The ship had slowed down considerably, but when it bumped into the whale, it ended up breaking off the Mary's figurehead. The sheep's head broke with a loud crack and went flying overhead so that when it hit the deck they could hear Luffy's scream of horror. Hey! That was my special seat. Once everyone had caught their breath and let sink in what happened, they broke out the paddles and were now trying to slip past the whale without him noticing anything. Zoro, Usopp, and Sanji were all yelling at each other about what just happened. Alright, let's get out of here before it's too late, Zoro began. Someone mind telling me what the heck is going on? Usopp shouted back, looking ready to cry. It's so big that the cannonball didn't even make it flinch, Sanji cried as they were working hard to paddle, or his reaction time is really slow. Who cares? Zoro yelled at him, at least we're alive. Once again, the gigantic whale howled out, feeling as if his voice was a shockwave. The Straw Hats were all trying to block out the sound and only focused on paddling right past him. They kept rowing until they were passing right underneath the whale's eye, which was easily more than 4 times bigger than the little ship, when Luffy came back up to the deck, looking furious. Luffy, Nami whispered, wondering just what it was that he was going to do now. You think you can break my special seat and get away with it? Luffy yelled as he balled his fist. Leaping off the ship, the wings of a hawk sprang from Luffy's back as he flew full force right into the whale's eye. Take this. You moron! All the straw yelled. Each one of them had tears of fear in their eyes. For a second, time seemed to freeze, for nothing could be heard but the sounds of the waves hitting the ship. But then the massive eyes suddenly looked down at them and they screamed in terror. It sees us, they yelled, and looked ready to start paddling like crazy away from there. Luffy, naturally, stood his ground as he used his wings to hover in between the whale and his ship. I'm not through with you. There's a lot more where that came from. However, before their idiotic captain could escalate the situation even more, Nami threw a lasso from the ship's rigging that snagged the childish captain around his neck. With a yank, the noose dragged Luffy to the Mary, where Zoro and Usopp proceeded to kick him in the head, yelling at him that he could get them all killed. The massive aquatic mammal groaned angrily before he slowly opened his massive mouth, revealing the large teeth once again. Please, no, Nami croaked out, now crying hard. But the rushing water going into the gaping mouth was like a current, and their little ship didn't stand a chance as it was quickly pulled in. It acted as a black hole. They were pulled right into the whale's mouth, and there wasn't anything they could do but hold on tight and hope for the best. But as they were swept away into the mouth, Luffy was knocked overboard, screaming the whole way as his crew called after him earnestly. Luffy almost hit the water, but had enough sense to regrow his wings and grab onto one of the iceberg-sized teeth and hung on tightly, lest the powerful winds brought up by the behemoth's breathing suck him in as well. I am not gonna die here, Luffy growled as he held on for dear life. Through the wind he struggled to climb his way up. After a few moments, the whale closed his mouth, eating the going merpinning as if it was going down the drain. However, it was almost anticlimactic when it was over. Just then, Luffy had been able to climb up to the head, breathing heavily as if he had run for hours. As he attempted to catch his breath, he had anger and fear on his face as he looked around, wondering what to do. "Aw man," Luffy stated, barely controlling his panic. Everyone was swallowed whole. "Hey!" he screamed as he started punching the rubbery skin under him, yelling that he spit them all at once. With each hit, Luffy shifted between some of his heavy hitter forms such as a grizzly bear, an elephant man, and a tiger hybrid. Seemingly ignoring the, for all intent and purpose, zoo hitting its hide, the whale stared to submerge. "Where do you think you're going, you jerk?" Luffy demanded, sounding more and more angry with each second. "Listen, you big whale, I'm not gonna ask again. Stop sinking. I mean it, my friends and me are on an important adventure. I can't lose them." Luffy seemed to be going nuts as he took his chimera form and roared out, "Give them BAAAAACCCCCCCK." Meanwhile, the whale was continuing to go down, and it would only be a matter of seconds before Luffy would sink along with it. The water was rising up quickly, and as he stared around looking for where he should swim off to and thinking of any form that could do any damage to the whale, Luffy noticed something embedded in the whale's head. Luffy noticed it looked like a hatch for a submarine and, without thinking, he ran over to it and opened it so that he could jump in. He managed to close the door just as the entire area was submerged into the water. While he could have turned into any number of sea creatures, Luffy didn't want to lose track of the whale and by extension his crew. Despite the whale's size, Luffy didn't want to risk it. "I might not know what kind of whale this is," Luffy said to himself after he got a good look around and found himself to be standing in an iron hallway with light hanging every few feet, "but I'm pretty sure most animals don't have doors and lighted hallways in them. What kind of whale is this?" The Chimera boy started to walk down the hallway, but then something else happened. The room seemed to tilt and Luffy was knocked off his feet so that he went tumbling down. Luffy was bouncing around like a rubber ball down the hallway until he ended up in a large tunnel with metal walkways on either side of a river. He was going so fast that he couldn't even concentrate properly to get into a form that would prevent his fast descent. Luffy bounced around violently and landing with a painful thudding sound on the walkway. Gasping for breath, Luffy raised his head and stared around. "Hey, that's weird. The whale's got a river inside it too," he gasped as the room began to shake again and was tilted up one way. Luffy tried to hold on so that he wouldn't go sliding down again, but it was too steep for him. He slipped and fell. Despite all the constant rocking back and forth, after a few minutes, Luffy had been able to straighten up enough so that he was now running down the hall, looking like he wanted nothing more than to get out of this place. He was waving his arms around in panic, trying to stop himself, but before he could, he looked up in time to see two people standing in front of a large, metal door. The two were a strange-looking duo. There was a middle-aged man with a large crown on the top of his long hair and the numbers 9 written on each of his cheeks. The second was a young woman with long, wavy blue hair tied in a tight ponytail and a bit of a stuck-up expression. The duo didn't seem pleased to see Luffy. They looked scared stiff at seeing someone come running at them, screaming at the top of his lungs, before he slammed right into them with such force that the doors were forced open and they were flying through the air. It was a bit of a shock to find that they were back under a blue sky and clouds, along with a small island, complete with a coconut tree and shack with the Mary right alongside it. "Luffy?" Zoro's voice came from the ship, and he saw the 4 of them standing on deck as they watched Luffy and the other 2 go flying by. "Zoro? Is everyone okay?" Luffy yelled in relief before he realized that there wasn't much to stand on and he was falling fast. I can use a hand," he yelled before the 3 of them hit the digestive juice. Later, the crew had just fished Luffy and the other 2 out and were all on deck, and the constant shaking had stopped and there was a deep, almost humming sound that they could hear echoing off the whales, whose name turned out to be Laboon, stomach walls. "I don't claim to speak whale," Nami said, going to the railing and looking around, "but it seems to have calmed down a bit." "Seems that way," Zoro said, looking at woman and the man. "Now, we saved your lives for the time being," he told them irritably, "you better talk and make it quick." Sanji was right up next to woman and was almost drooling when he saw her. She looked at him with a mixture of apprehension and repugnance as she moved closer to her partner. They then heard her whisper, "Mr. 9, these heathens are pirates." Mr. 9 looked to her and they heard him whisper back, "Yes, that's painfully obvious, Miss Wednesday. But if we speak to their humanity and compassion, they should understand our plight, maybe." "You know, we can hear every word they're saying," Usopp said, all of them shaking their heads at this. "Well, I noticed that some people do tend to think that pirates are stupid," Nami proclaimed. And she admitted that when you met people like Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp, she could understand why. "You parasites are still here?" yelled an aged voice from above them, and they looked up to see an old man standing up on a small iron platform next to the enormous gate that they had come charging out of. He had a rather stocky and muscular body, with a bald patch on the top of his head, but with white hair with yellow flower petal-like things. The man, Crocus, declared loudly, "I grow weary of this, and for the last time, as long as I draw breath you will not lay a single harmful finger on Laboon." "He's back again," Usopp said as Luffy looked to them and asked who he was. Suddenly, the 2 weirdos were laughing. "You can't bully us into abandoning our mission, Miss," Wednesday said in a conceited voice as she picked up one of 2 bazookas that they had been carrying with them. "We were sent here to hunt this whale and that's exactly what we're gonna do," Mr. 9 yelled in agreement as he also picked up one, and this time we won't let you interfere." They held up the guns as Luffy looked on. "We're about to give this whale a new blowhole, fire baby." As they launched the 2 cannonballs at the walls of Laboon's stomach, Crocus jumped right into the line of fire, protecting the whale from the weapons. Crocus, burnt and injured, fell into the pool of acid as the Straw Hats all gasped at what he had done. The woman let out an annoying laugh and proclaimed, "Your defiance is pointless. Go ahead. Waste your time," Mr. 9 yelled, and Miss Wednesday continued to laugh. "But make no mistake, that hulking beast will provide food for our town." With Crocus now trying to stay afloat in the acid, the two continued to cackle and Luffy seemed to lose his patience. He slammed their heads so hard that he knocked them out. "Ah, what was that for?" Usopp asked him. "I just," Luffy said looking up in aggravation, "wanted to hit them." After they fished Crocus out and tied the two up, the old doctor invited them over to the island, which was actually a ship with an iron bottom so it could float here without worry of dissolving. "I thank you for saving my life," Crocus said gratefully once he made himself comfortable in a lawn chair, "though I must ask, why did you do it?" "I wasn't trying to save you," Luffy answered bluntly as he started to climb the tree. "There was just something about those two I didn't like." "Okay. I think it's about time we got some annoyance," as Usopp tried to pull Luffy back down the tree. "Who are these guys?" she asked, pointing to Ms. Wednesday and Mr. 9. "And how did you end up inside this whale?" "These two are thugs from a nearby town looking for whale meat," Crocus answered grumpily. "If they caught him, Laboon could feed the townspeople for at least 2 or 3 years easy. All they're concerned with is feeding their fat, greedy bellies." "Laboon?" Nami repeated in confusion. "That's the whale's name," Crocus answered gruffly. "He a unique and magnificent creature. An island whale, a rare species that can only be found in the West Blue. I won't allow them to slaughter him for food." None of them noticed Luffy's ears perking up as he stored that tidbit of information away for later. "But if these whales are found only in the West Blue, how did we end up meeting them in the Grand Line?" Usopp asked in confusion. "You saw how big they were. I guess that even an entire West Blue Sea isn't big enough all the time," Sanji answered. "I mean, it's not that hard to think that such a large pod of whales don't visit the Grand Line from time to time. They're bigger than some sea kings and I'm sure they can take care of themselves. It's a shame he's stuck here so far from his domain," Crocus went on with sigh. "You see, there's a reason he keeps hitting his head against the red line and hollering at Reverse Mountain." "There is?" Nami asked a little quietly. "Yes," Crocus answered looking at them. "To put it one way, inside Laboon's body beats the heart of a human. He has most impatiently awaited and is eternally devoted to a certain band of pirates." He paused and added, "Going on 50 long years now." All who have seen Laboon ask the same questions. Crocus went on. "Why does he continuously strike his body against the red line? Why does he keep howling at Reverse Mountain? Listen closely and I will reveal Laboon's tragic story." Crocus sighed and began. "One fine, sunny day, while I was fulfilling my duties as lighthouse keeper, some good-natured pirates came down from Reverse Mountain. They were followed by a baby whale, spry and chipper, who I would soon come to know as the one and only Laboon." And so he told them the whole story. How these pirates had met up with a baby whale while they had sailed the West Blue, and Laboon had traveled with them for most of their journey. But knowing how dangerous the Grand Line was, they had decided that it was in Laboon's best interest to leave him behind where he would be safe. But Laboon had followed after them anyway because he had come to see these pirates as his family. The damage that their ship had taken just getting to the Grand Line, however, was very extensive, so they decided to stay here for several months to sing with Laboon until repairs were made. After about 3 months, and their ship finally repaired, they had asked Crocus to take care of Laboon for them until they came back. They had promised that when they finished sailing around the world, they would come back for him and that the whale would then come with them on their future adventures. Crocus sighed and finished his tale by saying, "That was 50 long years ago." 50 years? Sanji repeated as they all stared at him. "So Laboon has been waiting here all this time for his friends to return?" Usopp whispered, his eyes wide and his jaw falling open at hearing that. "No wonder he's upset," Nami said, looking up at the whale with new sympathy. "That kind of wait would drive anyone crazy." They could hear Laboon's voice crying out once again as the Straw Hats climbed up on the ship and had Crocus lead them out through the door and through a long canal inside Laboon's body. "This is some canal," Zoro suddenly said. Amazing, this whale's still alive with a hole like this in its body. I suppose you're responsible for this? Sanji asked Crocus, as the little island boat went sailing alongside them. Crocus was reading the paper and didn't look up as he answered. Just a doctor's playful mind, he stated causally, as if telling them what day it was. Doctor? Usopp repeated in surprise. That's right, he answered, legally certified. I also ran a clinic on the Grand Line once upon a time. Before that I served as a ship's doctor. Really? Luffy said eagerly, as he sat up on the broke Mary's head. That's great, then join us, we need a doctor. Don't be ridiculous, he called back, stopping near a ladder and started to climb. I no longer have that kind of energy. Exploring the seas is a young man's job. Sanji asked what kind of doctor would hollow out a whale's insides. Maybe it's part of the treatment, Nami suggested as Crocus reached the top of the ladder and stood on a platform. The girl is right, he answered, looking back at them. With a creature of this size it's virtually impossible to treat it from the outside. Therefore I devised a more drastic solution. Here's the exit, he added as he then turned a wheel and the large door opened up and they could see the sky, the real sky. Don't you think 50 years is a bit extreme? Usopp suddenly asked. Those pirates sure know how to test someone's patience. Idiot, don't you get it? This is the Grand Line, Sanji yelled at him as they moved the Mary's head onto the upper deck. His friends are dead. He blew out smoke from his cigarette and added, that whale can wait forever, they won't be back. Nami folded her arms and said, sad to say, but it's probably true. Back in the day when those guys traveled the Grand Line it was an uncharted sea. 1,000 times more treacherous than it is now. Usopp gave a grunt of anger and ran over to them, yelling, why are you all being so pessimistic? You don't know that they're dead, they could still come back for him, come on. Have some sympathy would y'all? I thought it was very touching. I mean a whale still believing a promise that his friends made to him despite all these years? That's a true bond, right Pops? Indeed, Crocus agreed, but he leaned his hand against the coconut tree and answered, but the lesson here is that reality is cruel. Laboon's cohorts aren't dead. The truth is that they abandoned their quest. And then told them that he learned that the pirates turned and left the Grand Line through the calm belt. He couldn't claim to know exactly what happened to them, but he doubted that they would ever return for him here. So if I got this straight, Sanji said, now sounding angry, these pirates were a bunch of cowards who cared more about saving their own asses than keeping a promise to a friend. Usopp's voice rang out in outrage. Why would anyone abandon such a loyal creature? Just look at him, it's cruelty on a grand scale? But if you've known all this, why haven't you told him? Nami asked Crocus. Laboon can obviously communicate with you. He seems to understand humans quite well for a whale. I did tell him, Crocus admitted, down to the last miserable detail. He sighed as he said, that was the day Laboon began to howl at Reverse Mountain. Soon after he started slamming his body against the red line. It's as if he believes that wall is what keeps his friends away, and that by breaking it, he can clear the path for their return. He refuses to believe me because then he'll have to admit that it's over, Crocus said grimly, and that though terrifies him more than anything, there's no way for him to go back to the West Blue, so what we have here is a paradox of tragic proportions. Laboon is a lost soul dying to live with his friends, but won't stop killing himself to reach them. Tragedy, Sanji stated, but still, despite all the grief those pirates put him through they did the same thing to you by saddling you with their burden. He pulled out his cigarette and asked what he was going to do, and added that he had done enough for Laboon. The scars on his hide are deep, Crocus answered simply. Those in his heart are even deeper. He needs someone to tend his wounds and I'm all he's got. For years he's battered himself and I patched him up. A stranger KS. Their attention was brought out of the story as, with a loud cry, Luffy flew high up into the air on eagle's wings. They all watched in shock as Luffy reached Laboon's head, and found a place that was already bleeding. Most likely where he had slammed his head against the red line earlier. This was the opening that Luffy needed, and transformed his body into that of a swordfish. The pointed tip of the fish was propelled by gravity right into the wound, causing blood to gush everywhere. This time, Laboon felt the pain and his eyes watered up in pain as he let out a loud howl of agony. Luffy, having transformed his body back into human form, gripped onto the whale's front tightly. If one were to look closely, they would notice the octopus suction cups that had sprouted along his arms. Between thrashes, Luffy would unstick one of his arms and deliver a powerful punch to the open wound. Laboon was now angry as he jumped right out of the sea and slammed Luffy right into the red line with his body. The waves that the whale was creating almost ended up capsizing their ship, and with the size of the waves, there wasn't anything the Straw Hats could do but hold on for dear life. Luffy got right back up and was now grinning cockily at Laboon. The whale was now seriously ticked off and went to smash him with his tail, which did end up hitting him. Luffy then grew in size to that of an elephant and dug his tusks into the whale's side, but Laboon retaliated by slamming him into the lighthouse. This continued on until Laboon had actually managed to lift a part of his body onto land to try and go at him again. But then Luffy suddenly screamed out, "It's a draw." Those words shocked Laboon so much that he stopped. Luffy looked up, dirty and bruised, but was smiling. "I'm stronger than I look, but I had a feeling you knew that." Laboon just looked back, and even those who didn't understand whale could tell that he was completely lost here to what was going on. "I can always tell when someone's itching for a fight," Luffy told him as he looked up. "Well, if you want a battle I'll give you one. Your shipmates used despair with you, didn't they, and you miss it? Well, I can rival anything they threw at ya. Tell you what, after me and my friends travel the Grand Line, we'll come back here and find you." Tears were forming in Laboon's giant eyes as Luffy finished. "Then you better be ready for a rematch." Tears were now falling from the whale's eyes. The anger and madness that had been there only seconds before seemed to fade as he let out another howl. But this time, it wasn't of sadness, it was the thrill of another fight. After a while later, after they had retrieved the mast off Laboon's head, Luffy had gotten some paint and had managed to do a very poorly drawn version of their Jolly Roger on the whale's head where the scars were. It looked just like Luffy's first attempt to draw their flag before, and it just looked so funny painted there that they all laughed a little at it. "Hey, not bad," Luffy commented as he looked back to admire his work, also covered in paint. "Consider this a symbol of my promise to come do battle with you." He told him, "Course, it's a rushed paint job, so you'll have to be careful and avoid hitting your head or you'll rub it off, understand?" Laboon grunted in acknowledgement. "Good whale," Luffy stated happily. Nami told Luffy to clean himself up as she tried to work out a plan for the Grand Line journey. Luffy looked annoyed, but did what she said. However, as he got back to the deck he spotted two things different here. First off, Ms. Wednesday and Mr. Nine were gone, and second, he spotted what looked to be a cross between a compass and an hourglass rolling around on the deck. "What's this thing?" Luffy said to himself as he picked it up. But then the crew heard Nami screaming and the noise startled Laboon so that he dove under the water. "You mind?" Luffy yelled back as Sanji and Usopp climbed up to talk with her, Sanji bearing plates of food. "Keep it down." "You idiots," Nami's voice yelled, "the compass is broken." Looking surprised, Luffy put the strange device into his pocket and they followed him up so that they were sitting at a small table outside the lighthouse with the other three already gathered around it. Nami was there with the map and her compass in front of her. The little needle was spinning around and round, never stopping. "The needle just spins. It won't stop," she told them all. As they all talked amongst themselves about it, Crocus, who had been standing close by, turned to look at them. "It is sadly apparent that none of you possess the slightest knowledge to how things work here," he said. "Did you all come here to die?" As they all looked to Crocus and he explained, with Sanji warning Luffy not to eat all the food, "There is nothing wrong with your compass. The Grand Line has little regards for the rules of the sea. Common sense is useless in this place." "The needle?" Nami asked slowly, "Why does it spin?" And so Crocus told them the reason why normal compasses don't work on the Grand Line was because of the nature of the island's magnetic fields. In order to navigate the Grand Line, a special compass called a log pose must be used. The log pose works by locking onto one island's magnetic field and then locking onto another island's magnetic field. Luffy pulled out the device, which happened to be a log pose, that he found earlier, and Nami ended up punching him for not telling them about it. He argued back that he found it on deck and assumed that those two must have dropped it when they escaped as Nami took it from him. Crocus then finished up his explanation by telling them that there were a total of 7 different routes that diverge from Reverse Mountain and travel east before merging again to the last island, Raftel. An island that's existence was only confirmed by Roger himself. "Raftel," Nami repeated softly. "That's it," Usopp yelled excitedly, a big grin on his face. That must be where the One Piece is hidden. That's the most promising theory, Crocus said, but no one has been able to set foot on Raftel Island since then. Luffy, who was chewing on some of the bones of the meal, grinned. Don't worry. We'll know soon enough. Crocus was looking at him with new surprise as Luffy finished the food and everyone began yelling at him for not leaving anything for them. Sanji, especially, was furious and beat him up for it, however ended up breaking the log pose in the process. Nami kicked both men into the sea, screaming that she was going to kill them if they didn't get out of her face. Fortunately, Crocus had one and he gave it to them as a thank you for helping Laboon. Laboon then came out of the water with both Sanji and Luffy, but also brought up Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9. Since they lost their log pose, they needed a ride back. This brings us to Luffy sitting up on the table with Vivi and Mr. 9 on their knees. Whiskey Peak? Repeated Luffy in puzzlement. Huh, that's a funny name. So what it is? Usopp asked. It's where we live, Mr. 9 snapped, before he added more respectfully, Sir. As Nami asked them what happened to their ship, Vivi answered nervously that it was destroyed. Asking us for a ride is pushing it, Mr. 9, Nami said slyly, especially after you tried to kill the whale. But when they tried to get some real answers out of them, the two refused to answer. Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9 were now begging, telling them that they couldn't tell them anything, because of their line of business. They told them that the only thing they wanted was to just get home. We have confidence in your character, can't you grant us the same courtesy? Miss Wednesday asked. Please, we're begging you, show some mercy, Mr. 9 added. Don't do it, Crocus advised them at once. These two fools are dishonest to the core. They can't be trusted. Nami held up the broken log pose still on her wrist and told them that they didn't have another one and asked if they still wanted to ride with them. The reaction was in yelling at her for trying to trick them. But Nami merely smiled devilishly and said in a fake innocent voice that fooled no one, oh, sorry, I forgot, Crocus gave us his so. And as soon as they heard that, they got back to their knees and began begging for pity again. Mr. 9's face was twitching horribly, as if he was biting back what he really wanted to say. But to their surprise, Luffy said that it was alright for them to ride with them. Why? Usopp demanded, pointing an accusing finger at them. These two are obviously pretty shady characters, why would we take them anywhere? It's fine, Luffy repeated, don't sweat the small stuff, it'll be alright. Choose your route carefully, Crocus warned him seriously from behind him. Once you head out from here, you'll be committed to that course. It's okay, Luffy said happily. If we don't like it, we'll try a different route next time. Crocus smiled at Luffy's words, admiring the younger man's youthful spirit. Okay, it's time we get going, Luffy declared as he jumped to his feet and looked to the rest of his crew. Now that me and Laboon have an understanding, I can leave with a clear conscience. Just who in the world do you think you are anyway? Ms. Wednesday asked as Luffy stretched out his stiff body. What's that? Me? Luffy asked looking back at her before he said confidently, well, I'm the man who'll be king of the pirates. Crocus smiled widely at that, as if remembering something from a long time ago. But Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9 covered their mouths as they fought back the laughs. With the sun setting, they all climbed on board the repaired ship with Crocus letting them know that their log should be pointing directly to Whiskey Peak, and they finished saying their goodbyes. Luffy looked to Laboon. I'm off, Laboon, he said, be ready to fight when I get back. Laboon gave a surprisingly soft, almost purring sound as the ship pulled away. Next stop? Luffy cried out, Whiskey Peak? Ready, gang? Let's set sail. They all cheered as Laboon let out noises of farewell, the crew waving goodbye to him and Crocus. The crew and their passengers were surprised a few days later to find the Mary with a thick layer of snow on deck. Sanji was shoveling it all off, but each shovel full that he threw overboard was replaced quickly as the snow continued to fall. Luffy and Usopp meanwhile were fighting over snowmen when they heard Nami screaming in horror from inside the cabin. What's wrong? Usopp yelled as he and Luffy were stopped in the middle of their snowball fight. Sounds mad, Luffy said knowingly as Sanji declared that he would save Nami from whatever the problem was. Nami, dressed in a warm coat, came out of the cabin, staring at the log pose in horror. No way! Nami screamed before she cried out, make a hard turn 180 degrees, hurry. A 180? Usopp repeated, baffled as he dropped his handful of snow. Why would you want us to turn back? Did you forget something? Luffy asked curiously. The ship has turned around. We're sailing in the wrong direction. She yelled at them, still looking at the log pose. I only took my eyes off the log pose for a second. She looked up at the sky and said, I thought the waves were calm. Just then, Miss Wednesday asked from inside the cabin in that same conceited way. You're not a very good navigator, are you? You can't trust anything here. Not the wind, sky, waves, clouds. Nothing is what it seems in the sea. The only way to get reliable direction on the Grand Line is with the log pose. Everyone knows that, Miss Wednesday finished with a satisfied smirk. But the woman had finally gone too far and Nami kicked her and her partner outside. Shut your condensating mouths and do something useful around here, she screamed as she took charge. Brace the yard. Force the wind starboard. Turn the ship 180 degrees to the left. Usopp man the lateen sails. Sanji take the helm. When they went running off she then barked orders of the two, work you two. This girl's crazy, Mr. Nine stated as they began pulling ropes. All except Zoro were working desperately, as he was sleeping against the side of the boat, covered in snow. Hey wait! Looks like the wind changed. Usopp yelled, getting their attention, and he was right. It changed rapidly from freezing cold to a springtime gale. And that was how it went. The winds would constantly change, waves would become violent or calm when you least expect it. Once they almost hit an iceberg as a fog came pouring in. Although they had managed to turn just in time, the helm was damaged and Usopp went off to fix the leak. Dark clouds came pouring in and they were battling the fierce wind right after that as Sanji was forced to keep bringing food for them to keep their strength up. The winds were tearing the sails apart and water was filling the bottom of the ship. It was chaos. Thankfully, the horrible weather had finally calmed down enough that they could all rest on deck, trying to catch their breath. But true to form, Zoro had finally woken up and was telling them all that they shouldn't be so lazy just because the weather was nice. He didn't notice the evil eyes that Nami, Sanji, and Usopp were giving him as he finally noticed the two newcomers on deck. He went on to ask what they were doing there and Luffy explained the whole thing about taking them home. Grinning evilly, Zoro bent down to look at them. So tell me, what are your strange names again? 'Cause I don't think you two can be trusted. My name is Mr. Nine, Mr. Nine croaked out. I'm called Miss Wednesday, the woman added nervously, her eyes twitching a little fearfully. Right, Zoro said skeptically, his thumb under his chin. You know those names sound familiar and that's what's bothering me. In fact, the more I think about the more I'm sure I've heard them somewhere before. The two were looking terrified just as Nami hit Zoro over the head from behind and began to tell him that he was lucky that they didn't throw him overboard for sleeping when they did all the work. But as he glared back, looking ready to tell her off, she hit him 3 times over the head so that he was on the deck defeated, nursing his wounds. Nami stood up in front of them all and declared, Listen up everyone, there's no way to know what's gonna happen next. During the terror that most of us just experienced, she shot Zoro another evil look before continuing. I came to an understanding why this sea was named the Grand Line. She held up her fist and finished. My navigation skills are useless here. Anything can happen. But mark my words, I will guide us through. She then pointed through the mist and yelled out, We're here. Our first journey on the Grand Line comes to an end. And through the thick mist, they could see the outlines strange, cactus-shaped mountains with several buildings set up on either side of the river that they were traveling on. Luffy was crying out in joy at the idea of visiting another island. As he and the rest of the crew talked in excited voices, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine both jumped to the railing. They both said their thanks and goodbyes and chuckled darkly. Bye-bye baby, they finally finished speaking together before jumped overboard. That was a quick exit, Nami said. I guess we'll never learn what those nut jobs are up to, Usopp added darkly, looking over the edge to try and see where they went. Who cares? Luffy asked, turning back to the matter at hand. We're landing. The pirates had received a surprisingly warm welcome from the villagers. They even threw a giant party in the pirates' honor. This turned out to be a setup, however, as the town was actually a den of bounty hunters working for an organization called Baroque Works who hoped to capture the Straw Hats when they were out cold from the party. This didn't go according to plan for them though, as Zoro had only faked being drunk and was able to take on the small army of bounty hunters, easily tearing through their ranks. Soon, most of the buildings were mostly rubble and broken boards cast every few feet along with giant shards of broken glass, and the walls around them looked close to crumbling away. The damage, however, was not all caused by the fighting between Zoro and the Baroque works. Luffy and Zoro, bloodlust in both their eyes, came bursting through a wall and were going at each other. Zoro's blades clashed against Luffy's arms, which had transformed into the bladed pincers of a prey mantis. As it turns out, the Chimera Man had woken up later in the night and, seeing the beaten bounty hunters, thought that the swordsman was attacking their hosts for no reason. As a result, the captain wanted to fight him over it. So caught up in their fight that they didn't even notice the two figures who were pulling themselves out of some of the rubble. A man and woman. The woman had short blonde hair, was wearing a yellow dress with a lemon-like pattern and with 2 lemon earrings dangling from her ears. The man with her was a tall, dark-skinned man with black hair in short, spiky dreadlocks. He also wore a brown trench coat with the number 5 printed on, along with dark sunglasses. These two were Mr. 5 and his partner Miss Valentines, 2 of Baroque Works agents. Miss Wednesday was also there, riding a duck that size of a horse. She looked different from before. She looked a little beat up as well, and her long hair was let down, but she was still staring at Zoro and Luffy with terror on her face. The first two were both beat up, covered in bruises and cuts all over their faces. Looking at them, they didn't have to think hard to what must have happened. The two went charging at the fighting crewmates, convinced that they could win. But they picked the wrong people to fight. "You can't beat us," Mr. 5 yelled, prepared to die at the hands of Baroque Works officer agents. Both Luffy and Zoro stopped their fight and glared murderously at the agents, stopping them all dead in their tracks. The two looked truly terrifying. Their faces were covered in bloody scratches, while their eyes were devoid of any sympathy or benevolence. There was nothing but cold rage that was so strong that they could all feel chills going up their spines. Luffy's were like looking into the eyes of a rabid lion, while Zoro's held all the ferocity of a demon. "Shut up and go away," they both yelled, raising their fists. "You're interfering," and together they sent the two flying with such force that one might have felt sympathy for the two poor fools. With our fight, the two finished screaming out, a trace of evil flashing there. They were sent crashing into the side of the buildings until they were both out cold for good this time. Zoro grumbled to himself, "Stupid pests, messing with our fight." Luffy growled in agreement as Miss Wednesday was staring at them in amazement as they both went back to glaring at each other. Zoro glared at Luffy, now looking completely insane here. "Shall we continue?" he demanded. "Yeah," Luffy snapped back, looking just as demented as Zoro at that moment. With a crack of his arms, they became the burly clawed arms of a black bear. But as the two moved in for another round, their muscles bulging and the energy they were releasing seemed to bend the air itself as they clashed like sparks between them. However, before these two powerhouses could collide, Nami appeared out of nowhere and punched them both so hard in the faces that they were sent flying, knocked right out of their frenzy mode. "You two, what the heck do you think you're doing here?" Nami yelled at them both as they lay there, looking stunned at what just hit them. "It's lucky for you that you managed to keep the girls safe. You almost lost us a billion berries." She picked them both up by the scruffs of their necks, like how a babysitter would to two brothers who just didn't want to get along, and yelled, "You understand?" Miss Wednesday was staring at her, not understanding what she was talking about, as Luffy and Zoro were continuing to fight by pulling each other's faces and small punches like little kids. "What do you mean?" the other woman asked anxiously. "What berries? I don't understand. Why did you save me?" As the two continued to fight where they hung in Nami's grasp, Nami smiled and said to her, "About that, I think we need to have a little chat. You see, you and I have to work out a contract for a reward." She frowned at the two before she finally slammed them into the ground to stop them fighting for good. "Knock it off," she screamed. Later, the trio and Miss Wednesday, or rather her real name Vivi, were all seated in an alleyway. Luffy was sitting up on a barrel and was laughing his head off. "Oh," he said in new understanding, "they were all bounty hunters. Why didn't you just say so, Zoro?" "I did, like 12 times. Zoro yelled back furiously at him. "What a funny mix-up." Luffy laughed before Nami snarled at them to shut up, which they did at once. "Would you drop it?" Zoro demanded as Nami turned to Vivi and offered to take her home for 1 billion berries. Apparently, Vivi was a princess of the kingdom of Alabasta who had been undercover at Baroque Works for 2 years with her bodyguard Igaram, codenamed Mr. 8. However, her cover had been blown and Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine had been sent to deal with her before they ran into the two monsters. Igaram had begged Nami, who like Zoro faked being unconscious, into helping the princess. Nami agreed, though she blackmailed the man into paying 1 billion berries to do so. "No, I can't," Vivi said sharply and Nami blinked in surprise. "But I appreciate the help you've given me so far." "Why not?" Nami demanded at once. "You're a princess, aren't you? So aren't you rich?" "Do you know much about Alabasta Kingdom?" Vivi asked sadly. And so she went into details about her home and how they were now in the middle of a civil war. The people are revolting and the entire kingdom was on the verge of self-destructing, so she had decided to take matters into her own hands when she discovered that someone was now behind this war. So she and her companion Igaram infiltrated Baroque Works to find out who was behind it all for the last 2 years. "You've got some guts considering you're a princess," Zoro said in an impressed tone. "So, were you able to find out what their plan was?" She nodded just as Nami answered, "To create an ideal nation." Vivi looked up at her in surprise and she explained, "Anyway, that's what Igaram said it was. Is that what you found out?" Vivi looked back down at her knees and admitted, "It's not. That was only a cover story the boss was using. It's a lie to cover their tracks." Her eyes darkened and she finished, "Their true goal is to take over Alabasta Kingdom." They all just looked at her as she said that she now had to get back home and warn everyone what was really happening before it was too late. She looked ready to cry and Nami sighed. "Okay. I get it," she said in annoyance. "I see how it is. Yeah, it's all starting to make sense now. I suppose you wouldn't have much money laying around during a civil war." "Hey," Luffy said eagerly, "so did you find out who's in charge?" Vivi looked horrified at the suggestion. "What?" she screamed, causing everyone to become startled at her sudden change in tone. "The boss's identity? You shouldn't ask that." "But you know, don't you?" Luffy asked calmly. "Ask me anything but that," she yelled, waving her hands around. "If I tell you, your lives will be in danger too." "Yeah, I'll pass," Nami added with a nervous laugh, clearly letting them know that she was happy not knowing. "This guy is trying to take over an entire country after all. I wouldn't want someone like that chasing after me, thank you." "No, you don't," Vivi said loudly. "I don't care how strong you people are. You wouldn't stand a chance against one of the warlords of the sea, against Crocodile." "Silence, who now?" Luffy asked, and Vivi turned white as she realized what she said and covered her mouth when Nami's jaw fell open in horror. "You had to say it," Zoro said like they were being watched. They looked up and they saw a strange sight. There was an otter in a white one-piece cloth with purple polka dots and a vulture with a flowered swim cap. Both with thick sunglasses. They all looked up at the duo for a moment before the otter jumped up on the vulture's back and they took off. It turns out the two animals were Mr. 13 and Miss Friday. They served as Crocodile's messengers and were also in charge of executing any Baroque Works agents that failed their missions. Nami then grabbed hold of Vivi's front and began to shake her as she screamed at her, with Vivi telling her how sorry she was. The men on the other hand were looking excited at the thought. "Hey, a warlord? That's cool," Luffy yelled out, his eyes shining. "Not too bad," Zoro agreed. Luffy began to laugh wildly as Nami continued to yell at Vivi before she began to cry. "Being hunted by a warlord in the Grand Line? That's more than I can handle," she cried, covering her face. "So when do we get to see this guy?" Zoro asked conversationally. "I wonder what he's like," Luffy added as Nami yelled out, "Shut up you." She then turned and began heading down the road. "It's been nice knowing you idiots. Thanks for everything," she yelled at them. "Where are you going?" Luffy called after her. "They don't know what I look like yet," she yelled back, "I'm leaving." And no sooner had she said that did the otter show up with 3 very detailed drawings of Luffy, Zoro, and Nami. Nami clapped as she saw them. "Wow, that's so lifelike." And that was when they took off, their silhouette against the bright moon. Nami turned back to them and yelled, "No use in leaving now." "I'm really sorry," Vivi said again quietly, but Luffy said that she'll get over it. "Where's she planning on going anyway?" Zoro asked, as a twisted grin appeared on his face. "Well then, It looks like the three of us will be sitting right on top of Baroque Works' hit list. Luffy chuckled to himself, that's so awesome. Nami, however, was now sulking in a curled-up ball on the ground with Vivi trying to think of something to say to cheer her up. You have nothing to fear, someone suddenly yelled. The Straw Hats turned to see a fairly tall, muscular man standing there with 3 stuffed dummies and stared intensely at the group of pirates. Though it was clear he was a man, he was dressed in clothes similar to Vivi's, and with thick tube-like hair had been done up in a ponytail, and even wearing lipstick. It's the man, who turned out to be Igaram, coughed. He started to hum scales before he went on to say, it's gonna be alright, princess, I've come up with a plan. Igaram, Vivi exclaimed, coming over to him, what are you? That's a really funny outfit, old guy, Luffy said as he looked over the outfit. An entire parade of idiots, Nami whispered where she huddled. Igaram began to tell them his plan. Since Baroque Works had learned who Vivi really was, agents would be sent after her to try and kill her. So he came up with the plan to disguise himself as her and try to draw their attention to give them time to escape. So these things are us? Luffy asked as he poked one of the dummies. A decoy, Zoro summed up for them. While Baroque Works is busy chasing after me, Igaram finished up. The rest of you will head with Vivi straight for Alabasta Kingdom along a less direct route. Hold on, just a second, Nami screamed, finally getting back to her feet. Who said we were gonna take her with us? They looked to her and she finished, we still haven't discussed the matter of payment. Payment for what? Luffy asked as he stared at Vivi. Take her where? Where have you been, Luffy? Zoro asked impatiently as he stood up and jerked his thumb to Igaram. The old man here wants us to take the princess back home to her kingdom. Oh, is that what all this yelling is about? Luffy said, getting it, and Vivi looked to him in surprise as he finished by saying, sure thing. Nami completely lost her cool and screamed out, Crocodile may already be after us. Is this crocodile guy really that dangerous? Luffy asked Igaram curiously. Igaram looked back and explained about how he was one of the 7 warlords, and because of that, there wasn't a bounty on his head. However, once upon a time, his bounty had once been over 80 million. 80 million? That's 4 times Arlong's bounty? Nami screamed out, there's no way. Sure, Luffy answered with a confident smile as memory Nami looked like she was about to burst into tears again. It sounds like it'll be fun. We are forever grateful, Igaram said, and they could hear the gratitude in his voice as he led them to a small ship and put the dummies on board before he turned back and spoke in a much higher voice. Now then, Vivi, will leave from here. Luffy began to laugh. Great imitation, old guy. Imitation of who? Zoro asked, looking at Igaram like he thought that he was insane. But Igaram didn't pay any attention to them as he asked Vivi for the eternal pose and she handed it over, looking like she was doing this against her will. They could all see the sadness in her eyes. The truth was that she didn't want this, but there wasn't anything she could do about it. What's an eternal pose? Nami suddenly asked and Igaram looked at her in surprise. You've never heard of it? He asked her. You can say it's sorta like a permanent version of the log pose, Igaram answered, holding up the little compass. It looked a great deal like the one Nami wore, only this one was made to look a little more like an hourglass shape with only one orb in the middle with needle floating inside it, and the name Alabasta was printed on the top. Whereas a log pose will always lead sailors to the next island on the course, an eternal pose will forever remember the magnetic energy of the island stored inside it. So it will always point to that island and no other. And this eternal pose is set to Alabasta Kingdom. And you're going to use this to set your course to home? Vivi asked him worriedly. Princess Vivi, please take the indirect island hopping route to Alabasta, Igaram told her softly, silently letting her know that he knew the dangers, but he was ready to take them. I have never gone that way myself, but you should only need to pass 2 or 3 islands to get there. He turned his attention towards Luffy. Please, take care of the princess in my absence. Yeah, Luffy said cheerfully. Igaram, Vivi started to say something, but her words died on her lips, unable to come out and say what she really wanted. I expect that your journey will be a difficult one, he said with a gentle voice and an encouraging smile. Please, be careful. Vivi still didn't look happy about it, but she forced a smile and took his hand as they promised that they would see each other again soon. They watched as Igaram set sail, all of them saying goodbye. But before he got too far away, there was a bright light and, to their horror, the ship exploded apart. The blinding light and force of the shockwave created a great wind and blew back at them, everyone looking stunned. The ship went up in flames, burning everything until there wasn't anything but a pile of burnt wood on the water. "They're already after us?" Nami exclaimed fearfully, once she got over the shock. "That's impossible." Luffy said nothing as he turned around and walked over a few feet to where his hat, that had been blown off by the shockwave before, and put it back on his head. He let out a loud yell, and looked ready to charge. Now was the time that they had to hurry and leave before they were killed as well. Zoro was right behind him as he yelled at Nami about the log. She quickly checked and let him know that it was set, they could leave. "Get the girl," he yelled back as he turned back to run with Luffy. "Come on, let's go." As Nami tried to pull Vivi away from the horrible sight, Zoro told Luffy that he'll get the ship ready and that he should get the other two. "Right," Luffy answered, "I'm on it." He street to the building where they had been staying. He broke down the door in his haste and looked wildly around the room for the cook and sniper. It was clear that there had been a party here, the whole place was a mess, and the two were both passed out on the floor, snoring loudly. Luffy grabbed hold of Usopp's nose and Sanji's leg, waking them up, but not soon enough. "Come on," Luffy shouted as he ran out the door, which was only big enough for him, and so he pulled his two crewmates out through either side of the walls, both of them yelling in pain and confusion to what was going on. Sanji was cursing at him to stop it and Usopp was screaming that his nose was gonna fall off. Luffy didn't stop until they reached where the ship was docked, and Zoro was just finishing up pulling up the anchor. "Hey, I got them," Luffy screamed up, holding them up. "Bring them up, we're ready to go," Zoro told him. Luffy turned around to check and saw Usopp and Sanji were both out cold. "What? They're still asleep." He shrugged and dragged them onto the Going Merry. Suddenly, they heard arguing and they looked behind them to see that Nami brought Vivi here and she was yelling at her, "We don't have time to look for him." "I'm not just gonna leave him here," Vivi yelled back. "But listen," Nami screamed, looking close to slapping her. Zoro yelled out asking what was the problem down at them. Apparently her duck's gone missing. Nami screamed up at him. And now she's refusing to leave without him. "This duck?" he asked, pointing to the duck that was standing next to him. "He's here," both women yelled in fury. "Yeah, he was there when I climbed on board," Zoro stated. "Made it here before I did," Zoro informed them. With the knowledge that her duck was safe and sound, Vivi climbed up the ladder, while giving them all directions to the best way out of here. With the sails opening, the Straw Hats were more than happy to say goodbye to Whiskey Peak and sailed off into a thick fog. As they got underway, Zoro turned to Vivi. "Hey," he stated, and she looked up in surprise. "Mr. Bushido?" she asked. Zoro asked how many people did she think that they were going to send after them. Vivi told them that there were at least 2,000 loyal employees and several bases like this one set up in the area. As she told them that, Sanji and Usopp both came to and began screaming that they wanted to stay another night. "We should have just left them behind," Zoro said irritably as Nami went and punched them both, shutting them up. "Nami? Will you explain it to them?" "I just did," she answered. "Okay, that was fast," he said in surprise. "I left out the complicated parts," she added. By this point, the first rays of light were starting to appear on the horizon and they were clear of the island, though they were now forced to sail very carefully through all the fog and avoid the rocks. One false move, and they could end up sinking right here. "Finally, it's getting light out," Nami sighed in relief. "I'm just glad we got away from the people chasing us," a voice said. "That's for sure," Nami agreed. "With all this fog, we'll need to be careful to avoid the rocks," the voice spoke again. "I'll take care of it," Nami shouted confidently before she realized that she didn't know who had spoken. She looked to Luffy and asked hesitantly, "Wait, did you?" Luffy looked at her in confusion, until they heard someone clear their throat behind them. And as everyone looked up they saw a figure sitting comfortably on the upper railings. The new figure was a woman in her 20s. She was a tall, slender, yet athletic woman with shoulder-length black hair. She has blue eyes, with dark, wide pupils, and she has a long, thin and defined nose. Her skin was lightly tan, and she wore a revealing purple cowgirl outfit, complete with hat. It's you," Vivi stuttered in shock and fear. "I just happened to run into your dear Mr. 8 a while back," the woman said coldly. "He didn't look so good." Vivi's eyes turned dark as she yelled, "So you killed Igaram? What are you doing on my ship and how did you get here?" Luffy demanded of the stranger. "Who are you? Answer him." Vivi yelled, "What are you doing here, Miss All Sunday?" "So you know who she is?" Nami questioned. "Which of the numbered guys is she partners with?" "Her partner is Mr. Zero, the boss," Vivi said gravely. "She's a bad guy?" Luffy questioned her as Nami screamed in fright. "She was the only one who knew the boss's identity," Vivi explained as she continued to glare up at Miss All Sunday, as if expecting her to start attacking at any moment. "That's how we found out who he actually is, by following her back to him." However, Miss All Sunday said, "To be accurate, I allowed it." "So she's a good guy then," Luffy said, trying to understand this. "I know you knew we were there," Vivi yelled. "You're the one who told the boss what we knew, weren't you?" "That's right," she answered in a bored tone. "Alright, so then she is bad," Luffy finally concluded, pouting, and Zoro told him to cut it out. "You still haven't told us what it is you're doing here," Vivi yelled again, and the agent was looking annoyed at the rudeness. "Oh, right," she said coolly, "you were just so serious about the whole thing I couldn't help myself. A princess doing whatever it took to help her country while making herself an enemy of Baroque works. The idea was just so ridiculous." Vivi was looked enraged as she screamed out at the top of her lungs, "You killed HHHHHHIMMMMMM." The 5 straw hats had leapt into action. Sanji and Usopp were both up on their feet, Usopp with his slingshot loaded on one side, and Sanji on the other with a gun pointed directly at her head. Zoro was below them with Nami, both of them had weapons as well. Usopp and Sanji exchanged a brief conversation to what was going on, but the woman didn't look worried at all. "I would really appreciate it if you would," she said softly, and it all happened so quickly that they all missed what happened as she apparently threw the two off the railing. "Stop pointing those at me." "You mean," Zoro said gasped, "she's eaten." Nami went on before her staff and Zoro's sword were knocked out of their hands. And then Zoro finished, "A devil fruit." "But which one? What's her power?" Nami cried out, now standing farther back with the others in front of her like shields. Sanji looked up to get a good look at her and hearts reappeared. "Wow," he gasped, as if he had never seen anything like her before. "Now that I get a look, you're beautiful." Miss All Sunday chuckled a little at Sanji's words before she looked back to Vivi. "Now there's no need to get so excited," she informed her, "you can all calm down. I haven't been given any orders to follow you here. I have no reason to fight you." Holding up her hand, she used her powers to get hold of Luffy's straw hat, spinning it around on her hand in a bored way. "So, you're the captain," she said, looking over at Luffy. "I've heard so much about you, Monkey D. Luffy." "Give me my hat back," Luffy yelled enraged, shaking his fists at her. "You don't want me to come up there and take it. You are a bad person. I demand you leave this instant," Usopp yelled from his hiding place behind the mast. "Bad luck," the woman corrected as she put Luffy's hat on top of her own before going on, picking up a princess who Baroque works already made up their mind to see eliminated, protected by a mere handful of pirates. "But your luck gets even worse. Because of the direction your log pose is indicating, you see?" Nami was looking at their log in fear as Miss All Sunday answered, "The name of the next island is Little Garden. We won't even need to lift a finger," she finished up, "you'll all be dead long before you reach Alabasta." "My hat, give it to me," Luffy screamed, obviously not caring about anything she said. "Leave now, evil doer," Usopp yelled. "Evil doer?" Zoro repeated, rolling his eye. "Seriously?" "That's all a matter," ORL answered, not at all offended by it. "You don't think it's a little foolish allowing yourselves to be wiped out?" she asked as she threw back Luffy's hat and something over to Vivi. When she held it up, they saw that it was an eternal pose. "An eternal pose?" Vivi whispered as she looked at it suspiciously. "Using that, you can just skip right past Little Garden without stopping," All Sunday answered her a little smugly. She also explained that this one island was near Alabasta and that none of their agents know that course, so they shouldn't be followed. "What? So she's good after all?" Nami suddenly asked as she looked up at her, trying to figure out what was going on. But the gesture seemed to make Vivi angry as she yelled up, "Why are you giving this to us?" "It's gotta be a trap," Zoro said firmly, But Vivi was staring at the pose with a wondering expression and they could tell that she was trying to figure out what to do. "Oh, does it?" All Sunday asked as Luffy walked over to Vivi and grabbed the eternal pose out of her hands. "Forget your thingy. We don't need it," he yelled as he then crushed it until it broke into nothing but shards of glass and wood. Nami and Vivi were both looking horrified at what he had done. Nami obviously didn't feel that way as she kicked him hard in the face and knocked him to the deck. "You jerk," she screamed out, pointing up at the woman. She just went out of her way to show us an easier course to follow. Maybe she actually is trying to help us get away. But Luffy didn't react at all for a moment before he turned to look up at All Sunday and declared that she wasn't the one who decided where the ship goes. Both Luffy and the woman looked at each other for a few extra long seconds, with All Sunday just looking at him, as if she was trying to figure out a complicated question, before she smiled, as if she had it answered. "Well, that's too bad," All Sunday told them all casually as she walked along the upper deck, looking a little satisfied as she did so. It was as if she was glad that he had decided not to accept her offer. Nami looked ready to yell again but Luffy answered, "She blew up that funny old man and he was nice so now I hate her." "I'm sorry to hear that," she stated looking back at him, "and I'm sorry you didn't accept my offer. If you survive, I hope we meet again." "No," Luffy said childishly and she actually chuckled at that. All Sunday gave them one last smile before she jumped ship and when they went running off to look, they found her leaving on the back of a giant sea turtle, heading back to Whiskey Peak. Luffy watched after the turtle with bright eyes as Vivi fell to her knees in defeat. "That woman," she cried out, "I don't have the slightest idea what's going through her head." "Then there's no point in thinking about it, is there?" Nami asked irritably. "There's someone on this boat who's just like that," Zoro added as Usopp demanded to know what was going on and Sanji swooned over Vivi. After quickly explaining everything that was going on to Sanji and Usopp, their cook sighed and confessed that he was sorry that he missed all the fun. "But it sounds like there'll still be plenty of demand for my skills. No need to worry now that your sleeping prince has awoken, my sweet, you'll be safe." Usopp was stating the opposite. He was glad that he is asleep, as Sanji asked if Nami was jealous. She gave him a frosty look and gave him a definite no. "Excuse me?" Vivi asked hesitantly, and they all looked to her. She was standing there, looking truly terrible that she got them involved in this mess. "I'm sorry, but is it really alright that I'm on your ship? I'm just causing you a lot of trouble." Nami, meanwhile, looked put out as she came over and started poking Vivi's forehead. "It's a little late for apologizes, don't you think? If you didn't want to cause us trouble you shouldn't have told us who you were." "Sorry for that," Vivi said. "Isn't that right, Luffy?" Nami yelled and Luffy cheered, saying that he was hungry too, which didn't do anything to boost Vivi's confidence. "Well, for now," Zoro said, ending the fight, "at least we know where we're heading to." "Little garden, huh?" Sanji said. "Remember what she said?" Usopp said worriedly, "Are we gonna die?" Luffy laughed. "Who knows? Let's go, pirates." Later they were all standing on the Mary's deck with Sanji passing out fruit drinks to them all and Luffy asking them if they wanted to get out the fishing gear. "Fishing? Heck yeah, I'm in," Zoro said agreeably. "Sounds good to me," Usopp said eagerly. "I'll even make you one of my custom fishing rods. You'll love it." It was then that the men were all giving the duck, Karoo, drink after fruit drink, even cheering him on with each one he took. Nami came out of the cabin with a couple more drinks and Vivi, who was standing up there, looked to her, saying loudly, "They're acting like idiots." "Maybe this will help," Nami said, holding out the drink to her and Vivi looked surprised at that. "Just relax," she went on. "These guys may go through their goofy phases but when things get rough, they get to work. Trust me, I should know." "Sorry," Vivi said, calming down, "I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm getting worked up over nothing." Nami just smiled. "This ship will put you at ease," she reassured her, "you'll cheer up in no time." As she said that, Karoo had drank too much and was looking ready to burst. The others were all laughing around him and even Vivi cracked a smile as Karoo lay on his back, a fountain of juice erupting from his mouth. "Yeah," she said, "they're funny." Soon though, Nami's words went to the test. A dolphin, the size of a sea king had jumped out of the sea, and as if they had this all planned out, they all dropped what they were doing and got to work. Like a well-oiled machine, they got the sails ready and turned around, all of them knowing just what to do without being told. Soon they used the waves that the dolphin created to ride out and go at an amazing speed. All of them even enjoying the ride. Vivi stared at them all in amazement as Luffy asked Nami for direction when the excitement died down. Nami told them to sail portside and they turned without any other complaints. Just after that, they could see it in the distance. Through a light mist, they could make out a large island that looked like a tropical jungle. There's no mistake, Nami declared as she checked the log post to see that the needle was pointing directly at the island. Cactus Island and this one are definitely pulling against each other. She pointed at it and cried out, "Our next stop." Everyone cheered as they slowly approached. "This is it," Luffy yelled, jumping up and down with zeal, "our second island in the Grand Line." They followed a little river right into the island. The heat of this humid weather and thick plant life already starting to make them all uncomfortable. But Luffy wasn't deterred at all as he said, "I can see why they call this place Little Garden." "I can't, what's little about it?" Zoro asked him darkly. "Yeah, this island looks pretty harsh if you ask me. Why the cute name?" Nami added. The crew soon found themselves standing next to a shallow creek where Luffy had come running up to with Vivi riding Karoo. Luffy had skidded to a stop and went over to the water, something catching his eye. "Hey, what's the matter?" Vivi asked, wondering why he had stopped. "Over here. Check it out." Luffy called out excitedly as he picked up something from the water. "It's a shellfish that looks like a squid." He held it up to her as she got off her duck to get a closer look. "Shell squidfish," he finished proudly. "How strange," Vivi said, frowning as she looked at it. "It sorta resembles an ominoid." "Cool, huh?" Luffy asked and they heard the ground shaking, the sounds of giant footsteps. They all looked around and soon saw what it was with their own eyes. "That's weird," Luffy yelled, looking up to see the giant creature overhead. "What's a sea king doing on land?" Vivi screamed out sore. "Awesome," Luffy screamed as Vivi and Karoo could only yell in terror. The two could only stare up at the supposedly extinct animal in shock. Eventually, Vivi started to talk again. She spoke about how this island somehow stayed frozen in time. Luffy looked at her and she explained that the climax must have stayed like this since ancient times. Luffy's laughter rang out and he leapt up while his arms elongated to those of a gibbon so that he could hang onto the dinosaur's neck. "Dinosaur," he screamed joyfully. "Are you crazy?" Vivi screamed in terror. Luffy went jumping up to the dinosaur's head. He was standing up and looking around eagerly. Luffy began yelling down at Vivi that he found a place to have their lunch. "It's dangerous up there, come down already," she yelled. Like a mother would to a child who had climbed too high in a tree. "It may seem nice but it's still a dinosaur. We have something in common. We both love to eat." Luffy waved down happily. He then called out that there was a mountain full of holes and that they should go and check it out. Vivi was continuing to yell at him to come down as he was trying to get the dinosaur to take him to that mountain. The poor thing howled in pain when Luffy turned its head sharply. The noise it made was so loud that it shook the land and soon dozens of other dinosaurs, much larger ones, appeared from out of nowhere. Luffy was now fighting with the dinosaurs. They were all going at him, looking like a tangle of snakes above them as he slid down their necks like slides, jumping from head to head with the skills and laughter of his namesake, until he was finally eaten by the biggest one that was covered in scars. Vivi screamed when she saw the giant blade come flying out of nowhere and lobbed the neck of the beast off so suddenly that Luffy popped right out of the neck as it fell. A giant hand then appeared and caught Luffy like he was an action figure. The hand led up to a well-built giant with a beard so long that it went past his waist. He was dressed in Viking attire with a helmet that went right over his eyes. Luffy was standing on the giant's palm as the giant began to laugh. "Gegyagyagya," the giant laughed. "What fun, that was glorious. Watching the likes of you grapple with long necks is the most entertainment I've had in quite a while. You're my first visitor in a long while." "Wow, you're huge. Are you human?" Luffy asked, without a trace of fear. "Human? What a joke." The towering man laughed as he heaved his sword up on his shoulder. "Greatest warrior of all Elbaf, I am Dory." "Well, hi, I'm Luffy, and I'm a pirate," Luffy answered as if he hadn't noticed that there was anything wrong. Dory laughed again as he said, "A pirate? Well, good for you, my friend." "By the way," Luffy said, pointing down to Vivi, who was trying to get Karoo, who seemed to have fainted, to wake up so that they could get out of here. I'd like you to meet Vivi and Karoo. Say hi to Dory, Luffy added, waving down at them. Vivi was looking angry with him and yelled back from the ground, "That's great, Luffy. Just can't shut up." Dory just laughed again and invited them to his home in a good-natured way as he bent down and picked Vivi and Karoo up, both of them screaming fearfully as Luffy laughed. They spotted the mountain that Luffy talked about before, and Dory had already thrown an enormous chunk of meat to Luffy while the two were laughing. Luffy sat up on top of it, and was already making a head start on it. "You sure knew how to cook, Giant," Luffy laughed up at him. "Why, thanks for the compliment, your pirate goodies are good too, my little friend," Dory said happily as he laughed with them, although the portions are a little small. Luffy went on speaking, enjoying the mint. "Yeah, I know what you mean. But the chief on my ship made it special for this trip, so I'm glad you liked it, otherwise I'll have to beat you up." Dory stopped in mid-laugh and demanded, "Was that a threat, shorty?" Vivi and Karoo freeze up in terror before he then started laughing, slapping his knee. "I like you, little pirate. You're really funny." It was a very interesting conversation from that point on, as Luffy then asked Dory why he was living here all on his own, and Dory explained about how he and another giant named Brogy had been battling here for 100 years. How that, in their land, when a fight breaks out and neither side yields, their god would then decide who is right of winning the duel in their life. So they had been battling each other all this time, but there has yet to be a winner. Vivi, however, couldn't believe the reason for that and was asking if there was possibly any hatred between the two after all this time. But Dory just laughed as she continued to look confused. Suddenly, the volcano went off and Dory was getting to his feet, a flash in his eyes, and as they looked up at him, all of them feeling the surge of energy go through them. Dory picked up his sword and shield, heading off to the battleground as he quickly explained how that volcano was their marker. They must rush off to fight whenever it erupts. Vivi tried to stop them, telling him that it was senseless to keep fighting and asking why he hated the other giant so much. But Luffy told her to stop, that this wasn't anything like that. "You're right," Dory agreed with a firm smile. "This is about honor, I had forgotten." He then went running off towards the battle, our reason for our brawl. And at that moment they felt it, an enormous shockwave that came through the entire island. It was so great that they could all feel it. It sent a few chills up their spines, and even Luffy was knocked backwards by it. They watched, and soon the battle ended, in a draw. When it ended, they were able to get a good look at the giant Brogy. Like Dory, he too dressed in Viking attire, complete with a red helmet with 2 horns. Brogy, himself, had a blonde beard shaped like an axe's blade, beady eyes, pig-like nose. But he looked to be just as good-natured as Dory was as he tossed him several barrels. Dory had rejoined Luffy, Vivi and Karoo as he explained that he had seen Usopp and Nami with Brogy and that he thanked them for the drinks. Vivi began asking Dory if it really took a year for the log to reset. Dory admitted that it was the truth to Vivi, and also informed them that no human had ever survived on the island for the full year. He told them that some become dinosaur food. Others have died from heat or starvation. Some of them have even been dumb enough to attack him and Brogy. Dory ended by stating he supposed that an entire year just seemed to be too long for humans. Vivi was looking stricken, telling him that her country could be destroyed even if they could survive the year. "She's right," Luffy added, "plus I'd get bored here after a year. Isn't there anything else we can do about it, old man?" Dory thought it over as he put the barrels down and admitted that there was another eternal pose on the island. But that led them to Elbaf, and that was basically what he and Brogy had been fighting over this whole time. He stated that they could try to take it from them if they wanted. But Luffy shook his head, telling him that they weren't trying to get to Elbaf, but to Alabasta. Vivi agreed, saying that they had to stay on the course that would lead them back to her home. Dory thought it over again and stated that they could try sailing randomly. If they were lucky, they'd get somewhere sooner or later. They all thought about it before Luffy burst out laughing. "Maybe so," he laughed, "we may actually get there." Dory began laughing with him, along with the Straw Hats captain. For some reason, the whole thing did seem funny now that they mentioned it. "Now that I think about it, someone did leave the island once before his log was reset," Dory confessed as he roared with laughter. "And what happened to him?" Luffy asked, through tears of mirth. "How should I know that?" Dory stated, and soon, Luffy was practically rolling on the ground from laughter. "I'm sure he was able to get to the next island." He said that he didn't believe it as Dory agreed just the same as they enjoyed themselves. Karoo was looking close to laughing with the other two, but stopped when he saw the outraged look on Vivi's face, as if she couldn't understand just what was so funny. But just then, what sounded like an explosion came from within Dory's stomach. He let out a strangled yell, his eyes rolling into the back of his head, and smoke began to billow out of his mouth like the volcano. Luffy let out a horrified yell as he jumped up to see for himself. He was yelling at Vivi what happened, stating that was the same alcohol they had on the ship. Vivi then suggested that the Brogy was responsible for this. Luffy obviously felt the same way. His eyes turned dangerous as he jumped down and yelled right in her face, "Hold it! Were you even watching them? They fight their duels honorably? No way he'd do that." "Alright then, who did do it?" Vivi demanded just as Dory got back to his feet, reaching for his sword. His eyes were so angry they were now practically glowing red. There was no trace of the friendly, gracious giant here. There was cold fury practically radiating from him. Blood spurt from his mouth. "You strangers," Dory growled, breathing hard. "It wasn't Brogy. No way. No warrior of Elbaf would dare so. Who else is there to suspect on this island then? But you." Luffy glared up at the giant. Karoo screamed and went running off as Vivi told Luffy that they should get out of here. But Luffy wouldn't move, declaring that maybe talking wouldn't change anything, but running wasn't going to do any good either. Luffy passed Vivi his hat and told her to stand back while he took care of things. She stared at him as she took the hat and asked, "You're going to fight Dory?" Luffy cracked his knuckles and admitted that he didn't want to, but he had to settle this. Vivi shook her head as she looked to Dory and tried to reason with him that they weren't the ones who did this and that he was in no shape to fight. But he was beyond listening as he swung his sword, blood coming from his mouth. The fight began, and as it went on, it was clear that Luffy was trying his best not to wound the already hurt giant. Instead of using any of his attack forms, Luffy would simply dodge the wide swings, only using his powers to enhance his maneuverability. Dory wasn't done yet as he finally slammed his foot down on top of Luffy. However, this little fight seemed to be too much for him as he held onto his stomach, falling to his knees and finally passing out when he hit the ground. Luffy was laying in the boot print, gasping for breath, dirty and bruised, but otherwise looked relatively unharmed. Vivi came running to him, asking if he was alright. But Luffy brushed off his own minor injuries and instead asked about Dory as he took his hat back. "He should be okay," she said softly, looking at him. "Guess you were right about fighting," she admitted. "He seems a lot calmer now." Luffy put his hat back on and, his eyes feral slits, snapped, "Well, I'm not. The old guy was right about one thing anyway. The other giant would never do anything like this. But I know that our friends would never do it either. They aren't like that." "Yeah," Vivi said softly, "but then, there must be somebody else on this island." Luffy decided without hesitation. Before the conversation could go any further, the volcano went off again. At the noise, Dory's eyes opened and he looked ready to go off. Breathing hard, still having blood on the side of his mouth, Dory tried to get up, but he doubled over in pain, still holding onto his stomach. Luffy tried to stop him as Vivi pleaded for him to rest. But he wouldn't listen. He claimed that he was a warrior and that if he was going to die, he was going to die as a warrior no matter what, even as blood erupted from inside him. With a great effort, he managed to get back to his feet. Still breathing hard, Dory made to run off, but before he did, he took hold of the mountainside and picked it up so that he could drop it on Luffy, to keep him from moving. Screaming loudly, Luffy fought to pull himself out. But Dory said softly to himself, "Forgive me, Elbaf." Luffy stopped as he watched Dory go over to pick up his battered sword again. "It's been over a century since we started the battle, this duel. Injured or not, I cannot allow myself to run away from this fight." He held his sword tightly as he straightened. To do so would be like running away from the title, warrior, and if I was no longer a warrior of Elbaf, Dory stated grimly, then I would no longer know who I am. He looked down and added, "I'm sorry I suspected you of causing the explosion." Luffy was now struggling to pull his body out from under the mountain, but his legs were so well pinned that even transforming into the smallest bug couldn't get him free, and he risked crushing himself if he went into one of his bigger forms. Dory sighed as he said that he knew now that this was judgment from Elbaf, their god of war. Luffy was looking furious as he screamed out, "Listen to me. God's protections and judgments have nothing to do with what's going on. If a god told you to just run off and die, would you? Someone's interfered with your duel. Dory stopped for a moment and listened to what Luffy was saying. A duel that's been interfered with isn't a fair fight anymore. Luffy screamed out at the top of his lungs. Isn't that right? Silence. Dory screamed out, sounding angry again. What could you possibly know about this? You're a human who can't have been living on this earth for more than 2 decades. How can you possibly hope to understand the ways of the warriors of Elbaf? And without another word, Dory kept walking with Luffy beating his fists around like a child having a tantrum. Trying to get the rock off him. Screaming for Dory to let him go. Vivi just stared at him, trying to calm him down. The look on her face clearly asked why he was so upset. Who was it? Luffy demanded angrily. Who would dare to interfere? I'll kill them. While the princess tried to think of an answer, a familiar voice suddenly sounded off behind them, screaming for Luffy. Usopp came bursting through the trees, tripped, bounced on a rock before crashing right into the mountain. Usopp was looking up, and when he spotted Luffy and Vivi there, he ran over to them, shouting out, "I have terrible news. A dinosaur ate Nami." Luffy also yelled in terror. Usopp cried out that they were running away from the dinosaurs together, but when he turned around, she was gone. They both began to freak out until Vivi yelled for them both to calm down and think things through. That just because she disappeared didn't mean that she was eaten. Usopp demanded to know just what else she thought could have happened, and Vivi finally suggested the answer. "I don't know for sure," she confessed, "but if Baroque Works followed us from Whiskey Peak, it would make sense for them to go after Nami, not you. I think we may be in great danger, we should go." Usopp gasped at Vivi's words. "You mean Baroque Works is here on the island with us?" he asked before he thought it over, and his fear was temporarily replaced with confusion. "Wait, but why capture Nami and not me?" Vivi explained that they most likely didn't know about Usopp or Sanji even existed, and so that meant that they were probably not on Baroque Works' assassination list because they never got in their way. She then suggested that the alcohol was probably meant for them instead. Luffy and Usopp's eyes widened as Usopp asked what she meant, and she told them the whole story about the exploding drinks. "No way!" Usopp screamed out, sweat falling and his eyes wide in horror. "They actually exploded inside the guy?" He looked behind him in the direction of the battling giants and asked, "Wait, he was injured that badly and he still ran off to go fight?" "I tried to stop him and that's how I ended up like this," Luffy explained darkly, still trying to pull himself out. "This is horrible." Usopp yelled to have been fighting for as hard as they can for 100 years and they always ended in a draw. In the distance they could hear the sounds of them fighting. Plus, their duels are fought with the most honor and pride in the whole world. There's no way they can settle it once and for all like this. Vivi just looked at them as Luffy fought harder than ever to get out. However, soon they saw what looked like a geyser of blood shoot above the trees. They all stared at it and knew it could only mean one thing. Luffy was now going crazy, banging his head against the ground in fury. Usopp and Vivi tried to calm him down, but he ignored them both as he fought. "Who was I?" He screamed out at the top of his lungs. "Who did ISSSSSSSSSSS?" Usopp was with him completely, also looking angry. "I don't know what we're up against here, but I'm gonna take care of them by myself." This lost its effect because his knees were shaking together. Vivi said that she was going to go with him, but someone said, "You're not going anywhere." Looking back, they were standing there where the two they saw before, though it was hard to tell it was them without the beat-up faces. Mr. Five and Miss Valentine's were there, holding onto a beat-up Karoo. Vivi shouted for him to let the duck go. Mr. Five did, but only because he wanted to. He threw the hurt duck to the ground and Vivi ran over to him in horror, calling out his name. "You can have him back," Mr. Five said. "We don't need him." Miss Valentine's laughed mockingly as Usopp asked Luffy who they were, and he said that they were from the last island. "Karoo never did anything to you. Why did you have to do this to him?" Vivi screamed at them. Mr. Five merely answered that they didn't have to hurt him if he just cooperated with them. They had wanted to use him as bait to lure them into the jungle where they could attack them. But Karoo had refused to help them and kept silence the whole time. But when they found out that Luffy was trapped like this, they didn't think they had anything to worry about. As they laughed at Karoo, Vivi declared she was going to kill him. Usopp demanded to know if they were the ones behind injuring Dory, which they didn't bother to deny. As soon as he heard, Luffy was now looking ready to kill as he tried to crawl out. Vivi pulled out her weapons and looked ready to fight as well, but they didn't seem concerned. The two charged ahead, but Usopp's exploding stars didn't work as Miss Valentine's flew out of the way and Mr. Five sent his own bomb at him. Miss Valentine's fell on Usopp like a boulder and Mr. Five grabbed Vivi by the throat. Mr. Five reassured them that he wasn't going to kill them because Mr. Three gave them orders to bring them in alive. He passed Vivi to his partner as he walked over to Luffy, and he actually exploded, burning Luffy, Usopp, and Karoo in the process. The three lay there, their eyes rolled back and smoking. Mr. Five smirked down at Luffy. "Consider this our thank you for what happened at Whiskey Peak. You should learn to mind your own business, you pathetic excuse of wannabe pirates. It will be quite beneficial for your heat. By the way, we have your swordsman friend. We've captured the other girl you brought along with you as well." "So you caught Zoro?" croaked out Luffy, his face still in the dirt. "That's right," Mr. Five said with a sneer, and suddenly, Luffy was chuckling softly. "In that case," he whispered, "you're in more trouble than I thought." "Well," Mr. Five said, "let's see how big you talk, after one of my kicking bombs blows up that little face of yours." Luffy forced his head to look up, a smirk there. "Try whatever you want, I'm gonna kick your butt." And then he spit on Mr. Five's shoe. Mr. Five grew furious and then he kicked Luffy's face, which did explode. Vivi screamed as Mr. Five continued to kick 1, 2, 3. He kept kicking about 13 times, each kick exploding, until he was tired and Luffy was burnt black. "You weak little fool," Mr. Five said, as Vivi screamed out for them. Luffy managed to get out a choking laugh, which caused a small cloud of soot to come out of his mouth. Mr. Five developed an angry tick mark at the straw hat wearing idiot who refused to stay down. "And what?" he sneered at Luffy's prone form, "is so funny this time?" Luffy stopped chuckling and looked up at the Baroque Works agent with a strange gleam in his eyes. "Thanks for that. I was so upset about what happened to that giant guy that I couldn't think clearly. Your kick knocked some sense into me though, enough that I just figured out how to get out of this." Mr. Five was about to retort before he noticed Luffy's body shrinking. Unlike before, Luffy went for a form that, while smaller, was easily able to wiggle out of his trapped position. He became a rat. 1. Ignoring Miss Valentine's girlish shriek at the sudden appearance of the rodent, Mr. Five was more focused on how the boy he'd previously thought to be hopelessly trapped was now free. He barely had time to mutter, "Oh, crap," before Luffy's smaller form shot up to his previous height and beyond as he took on a rat-human hybrid form. The now taller Luffy gave the bomb man the grin of the mouse who got the cheese before slugging the man hard in the chin, knocking him all the way back to his still shrieking partner. "Remember when I said you guys were in more trouble than you thought? Yeah? Turns out that's happening now instead of later." Luffy smirked in a bloodthirsty way as he marched forward, cracking his larger knuckles as he went. Mr. Five scrambled up to his feet and, casting a worried glance at the approaching rat man, said to Miss Valentine's, "I think we've overstayed our welcome. Let's report back to Mr. Three." The blonde woman quickly nodded her head and Mr. Five once again exploded, but unlike the previous time this was more of a smoke bomb than an explosive one as a thick cloud of dust covered the area. Coughing, Luffy tried to pick up where the two creeps were at, but due to the dust his vision was blocked and his sense of smell was messed up. Plus, the bang from the explosion left his sharp ears ringing, so he couldn't make out a thing. When the smoke cleared, there was only Luffy, Usopp, and a now recovering Karoo in the clearing. "Oh no! Those two jerks kidnapped Vivi!" Usopp cried out in terror. Still in his hybrid rat form, Luffy growled, "And I can't pick up their scent. The explosion must have covered it. Darn it!" He whipped his tail angrily. "I'm really getting sick of those two." Karoo let out a quack and Luffy whipped his head around to the duck. "Really? Can you lead us there?" Usopp looked at Luffy strangely. I didn't say anything, Luffy." "Not you, the duck," the Chimera man said as he pointed to Karoo. "He says he knows where those two were going since they took him from there earlier. He can lead us to those two creeps and the rest of the crew." Usopp exclaimed bewilderedly, "You can speak duck?" Luffy shrugged as he shrank to human form, Well yeah, I can understand all animals. I can only do it when I'm in either animal or hybrid form though. Human and partial transformations don't work for some reason, too. Anyway, let's get going. With that, the two followed the large waterfowl as he led them through the forests. They traveled for nearly an hour before they came across a clearing that contained a worrying sight. The giants were on the ground. Dory was face down and bleeding as Brogy was being restrained with large quantities of wax, including what looked like large wax spokes impaled in his hands and feet. Vivi, Zoro, and Nami were there as well, and they seemed to be trapped in a giant cake with a spinning pumpkin on a pillar above them. Flakes of wax from the candles on top of the pumpkin were falling fast and covering everything beneath them with a coating of wax. The four underneath were already halfway covered with it, and Zoro seemed to be arguing with the girls over something. Watching them were Mr. Five and Miss Valentine's. However, there were two others there, with TG girl with blushed cheeks and braided pigtails, while the other was a rather frail-looking man with one big 3 achieved through his top knot. Seeing enough, the trio picked up speed till they were running full force into the area. Just as Zoro plunged his blades into his feet, and then Luffy, Karoo, and Usopp came bursting into the clearing with such force that they were sent flying. "When I get back I'm gonna kick the crap out of you," screamed Luffy as they threw by and smashing into some trees. "Luffy!" Nami's voice called in relief. "Usopp, Karoo!" Vivi yelled as the three came marching back. All three of them were looking ticked off. "We're here, Brogy," Usopp yelled. "Don't worry, we'll pick up where you left off." "Thanks, Usopp," he said, from where he lay as Nami screamed for them to hurry up and beat them until they were beyond recognition. Luffy promised that he intended to, as Mr. 3 laughed at him, trying to mock him on how pathetic it was that he had such a high bounty. But Luffy just noticed his hair and gasped that it was on fire as Mr. 3 screamed at him to shut up. "Yes, he has weird hair," Nami screamed at him. "Now could you break this pillar? We're about to turn into wax statues here." Luffy looked up at them in blasé surprise and asked bluntly, "Oh, are you guys in trouble?" "Nope," Zoro said, his sword over his shoulder. "No trouble at all." "Wait, Zoro. Your legs," Nami gasped, and that was when they saw blood seeping over the edge of wax. Zoro admitted that he must have made it about halfway through when Nami screamed at him, asking how that was no trouble at all. Vivi looked sick at the sight of it, her face turning a bluish tint as Zoro ignored the girls and asked Luffy if he could take care of the pillar, and Luffy smiled confidently. Zoro then smirked back as he lifted his white blade high, and Nami asked him why he was standing like that. "If I'm gonna be a statue I prefer this pose," he said, as if answering, telling her what 2 plus 2 was, as Vivi shouted at him, sounding close to hysterical. Nami was also yelling at him, telling him to at least do something about all the blood because she was getting nauseous looking at it all. "So quit looking at it then," Zoro told her off. "It's kinda hard to ignore," she yelled back, and soon they were both arguing as Vivi stared at them, as if she was convinced that they just didn't realize how much danger they were in. Brogy smiled in understanding at their now calm attitude. Even Miss Goldenweek noticed as she spread out a blanket and served herself some tea. She pointed out to Mr. 3 how they didn't seem concerned with what was about to happen to them. As Usopp and Karoo moved back to hide in the trees, Luffy went against Mr. 3. Right off the bat, the Candleman was able to trap his feet. This proved to be a bad thing because in the end, Luffy was able to use this to his advantage by turning his legs into a snake's lower body and, using the now loose wax, slammed his leg locks into the pillar, smashing it. The giant pumpkin fell, and for one horrible moment, they thought they were going to crush the three trapped below. But instead, it landed on the top tier of the wax cake and continued to spin, the process picking up rapidly. Luffy asked them why they didn't run for it. Nami and Vivi screamed that they were stuck. "Oh, really?" he asked in surprise. "Is that what's going on? The only thing you guys kept saying was for me to break the pillar. So that's what I did? Mr. Bushido, do you really think it's a good idea to put our lives in that guy's hands?" Vivi screamed at Zoro. "Well, we don't exactly have much of a choice here, do we?" the green-haired swordsman asked, not looking the least bit concerned. "I don't know about you, but I'm having a little bit of trouble moving right now. And you don't seem to be bothered by it somehow," she screamed hysterically. Mr. 3 laughed out, saying that all Luffy had done was move the candles closer and sped up the process, turning them into wax statues. "Wait!" Luffy yelled, Finally understanding what was going on. You guys are gonna turn into wax figures. That's what we've been trying to tell you, Nami screamed. Please just hurry up and destroy this thing, Luffy. Vivi begged and Luffy said that he got it this time. Mr. 3 tried to attack him just as Usopp sent an exploding star at him. However, Mr. 5 stepped in and, not only did he catch it with his mouth, but he swallowed it. Luffy went back to trying to break the pumpkin. He leapt into his gorilla form and was about to use his increased strength to smash the remaining wax just as Mr. 3 created a wall to block it. He then tried to trap him up again, but had only been able to trap one of Luffy's arms in the wax, which Luffy used to launch another attack at him, using the wax on his arm to break through Mr. 3's shield and sent him flying. Luffy, however, was suddenly standing there as if frozen and Nami screamed at him to hurry up, but he kept saying no despite them pleading. He just kept saying no, that he didn't feel like saving them. The crew failed to notice two things. Luffy was standing on a strange, black symbol on the grass. Miss Goldenweek holding a black-tipped paintbrush in her hands. Nami's eyes widen. Luffy, what's wrong? Yeah, Luffy said, still in that dead tone, but for some reason I can't get motivated to help. What do you mean can't get motivated? The three screamed. Finally, Vivi noticed the mark and yelled at Miss Goldenweek that she was behind it, which the girl confirmed. It's my colors trap, betrayal black, she said as she enjoyed some rice crackers. If you touch the paint you'll want to betray your friends no matter what they might say, even if they beg and pled for help. Vivi explained about Miss Goldenweek's ability. How her paint created different emotions and it could use it to manipulate others' minds. Does that mean that all he has to do is get away from the paint and he'll be okay? Nami asked as she tried to yell at him to get out away from it, but Vivi was telling him the opposite, screaming at him not to step outside the symbol and not to save them. And he did. Luffy snapped out of it and came back to his senses. Once he was freed, Vivi was screaming for help again. Luffy tried to charge in again to help, but Miss Goldenweek trapped him in another colored trap and the yellow paint on his back was making him laugh helplessly. Colors trap again. Laughter yellow, she declared, shouldn't have stepped outside the circle. Nami yelled at him to take his shirt off to get rid of the paint, but he couldn't move from laughing. Zoro glared at the wax covering his arms and mentioned that they'd be lucky to stay alive for another 5 minutes. It was looking bad, but thankfully, Usopp came running out on Karoo, running from Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine's. They ran into Luffy and smeared the paint, getting Luffy to stop laughing. Hurry and take her out before she does something else, Usopp yelled. Luffy, now looking annoyed, yelled at Miss Goldenweek for her to stop as he tried to fight, but instead she painted another symbol on the ground, this time a bright red color. And like a bull to a red cape, Luffy couldn't attack anything but the spot on the ground. Finally, Miss Goldenweek combined her yellow and blue paints to make colors trap. Tranquil green. So now Luffy was so peaceful that he was having a cup of tea with her. Luffy's face was twisted in pain, trying to break the spell. By this point, even Usopp was yelling at him about what the hell he was doing. With the help of Usopp and Karoo, they hit him with another exploding star so that they were able to burn the shirt and the colors trap right off. At this point though, the trapped Straw Hats resembled little more than wax statues, their faces set in different expressions. I'm tired of your stupid paints, you're through, Luffy declared, waking up and gasping for air. His skin now burned. I'm not going to let you hurt any more of my friends. His eyes narrowed as he yelled out, now I'm really mad. Mr. 3K had used the distraction to create himself a wax suit of armor, before he had Miss Goldenweek painted to make it stronger. As Luffy turned his attention back to Mr. 3, Usopp suddenly realized and he screamed out the way to save the others. That he reminded him that it was still wax and if they could melt it, they could still save the others. No way, seriously? Luffy cried out excitedly and Miss Goldenweek confirmed it as Mr. 3 yelled at her for that. Luffy, now in his Chimera form, fought Mr. 3 while Usopp worked out a plan to get the others out of the wax. He covered a rope with oil and told Karoo to run around the whole thing while he was slowly being crushed to death by Miss Valentine's. Thankfully, Luffy was able to grab hold of Mr. 3's burning hair and brought the little flame over to light the rope. It was a massive fireball, like an explosion, going up in a tower of flames. The heat alone felt like it was going to knock them over. The heat alone was easily enough to melt the statues and Mr. Three's armor until they were a mass of wax. With his protection gone, Mr. Three turned and went running off into the jungle with Luffy and Karoo on his heels. Luffy suddenly found himself in a clearing full of wax statues of Mr. Three. There were more than he could count, of all different positions, all looking at him. Just then, he heard Mr. Three's voice around them, trying to taunt Luffy into coming closer and try to find him. He then claimed that when he least expected, he would stab him. Luffy just stood there, as if lost in his own thoughts before he looked up. Luffy suddenly grew horns out of both his forehead and his nose as his skin became rough hide. 3. Now standing as a triceratops, Luffy charged in one random direction, and amazingly found him. "How could you have known that this was where I was?" he asked through foam in his mouth before he passed out from shock. The man being pinned to the tree with 2 of Luffy's horns under his arms while the third was just below his groin. Each horn was just a hair's breadth away from impaling the man, and the shock of it all made him lose consciousness. Instinct, Luffy answered just as Karoo spotted Miss Goldenweek trying to sneak away, and he went after her, her scream echoing around them. They soon were back clearing with everyone, even with Brogy out of the wax, and was crying his eyes out. He was crying so much that his tears were making a waterfall and a rainbow to match. But to their amazement, the sounds of his wails had woken Dory up, and he was now sitting up, freaking everyone out. As it turned out that it really had been the weapons that saved him, and Usopp realized that no weapon could hold up for 100 years of battle. They had to have been dull by now. Brogy, however, was crying shamelessly as he hugged Dory and continued to sob and laugh at the same time. But the playful punches they were throwing at each other, and soon they were fighting again. After all this madness, they took care of their injuries as they told Dory everything that happened while he was out cold. As they talked, the two apparently forgot all about their bounties thanks to their years trapped on this island. Vivi tried to apologize to them, telling them that it was her fault that they came here in the first place, but no one else seemed to buy that, as they all enjoyed the rice crackers that Miss Goldenweek left behind. And Luffy was even trying to get them to have a party. Nami was yelling at Luffy and Usopp, who were fighting over the crackers, about what they were supposed to do over their log pose. "All of you helped save us from those other guys," Brogy said. "If we can, we'd really like to repay the favor." But when Luffy suggested that they could help with their pose, they sadly admitted that there wasn't anything they could do about that. Just then, Sanji came out of the jungle, swooning declares of love when he saw the women. Usopp and Karoo were outraged. "Of course he's happy, the big, useless jerk," Hiss yelled. "He shows up after we take care of everything." Sanji yelled in shock after he spotted the giants and demanded if one of them was Mr. Three. When they pressed him to how he learned that name, he explained that he had been talking to Mr. Zero over a transponder snail in a hideout in the jungle and pretended to be Mr. Three when he talked to him. "And since I had him on the line," he finished up, "I went ahead and told him that we were all dead. So he thinks that he doesn't have to send anyone else after us anymore." Vivi gasped in understanding. "So you're saying that we're finally free from people chasing us now that we can't go anywhere anyway?" Usopp yelled dramatically. "Oh, that is just perfect." Sanji couldn't see what the problem was as he pulled out the eternal pose to Alabasta that he stole, which stunned them all, their jaws dropping open as they stared at it. But soon it was a celebration as Vivi hugged him tightly and they were getting ready to leave. Giant old guys, it's really been a lot of fun," Luffy said, waving up at them. Both giants seemed to have been lost in their thoughts for a moment, as if remembering something from a long time ago when they heard Sanji and Zoro go on about their hunting contest. "But we gotta go." "Of course," Brogy said in understanding. "Right. We can tell that you really need to get going." "It's too bad that you have leave so soon," Dory added, looking directly at Vivi. "I hope you make it to your homeland in time." "Me too, thank you," Vivi said gratefully, and they all started to head off with Usopp declaring that someday he would visit Elbaf one day. The Straw Hats were standing on the Mary's deck and sailing down the river to the ocean's edge. It turned out that the giants were standing on either side of the river, their backs to them and their capes waving in the wind. It looked as if they had come to say goodbye. As they got nearer, Brogy spoke without looking at them. "A great danger still lies ahead of you. It is an obstacle that has always been here," Dory added, just as dramatically, "to try and prevent people reaching the next island." Straw Hats were looking scared as their jaws dropped. But Dory went on, But every one of you fought like true warriors to protect the pride of our duel. And because you were willing to do that no matter what enemy you may face, Brogy stated. We will never let them destroy your pride, friends, Dory declared, his voice echoing around them, as if proving the sincerity of their words. You must have faith in what we say, Brogy told them. Go straight, no matter what happens, keep going straight, understand? Yeah, got it, Luffy cried out. No matter what happens, just go straight. They sailed past them both, with them bidding their final farewells, but soon Nami yelled out in terror to see something enormous rise out of the sea. The water rising up and some of them screamed when it was revealed to be an enormous goldfish, greater than even some sea kings. Hello Island Eater, declared Dory's voice from behind them. You will open the path, yelled Brogy, in the name of Elbaf, you will open it. Nami screamed at them to turn, but Usopp and Luffy both refused, saying that they just had to keep going straight. When she couldn't calm down, Luffy just told her to calm down as he threw the last cracker at her. Nami kept screaming at him to chance course, but Zoro leaning back against the door telling her to just give it up. Sanji, Vivi, and Nami continued to try to change his mind, but onwards they went. The last thing that they saw before they were swallowed was the two giants holding their weapons high. Just go straight, Usopp screamed, but he sounded close to tears. Go straight. What does it matter? Nami hollered at him. It was so dark that they couldn't see anything in front of them. We've already been eaten here. Straight, you hear? Luffy yelled from the front. Just keep going straight. You'll see, Usopp called from the front, impatiently looking around, waiting. But before they were able was a shockwave behind them and they were shot forward as the entire goldfish was ripped apart so that they were sent flying out into the open sky. The giants' battle cries behind them. It was just like how Luffy arrived with Sanji and Yosaku to Arlong Park as they were soaring high, across the bright blue sky and warm sun. We're flying! Luffy screamed out. Straw Hats were smiling in amazement as Vivi and Karoo cowered in terror. Don't bother looking back. 'Cause we're going straight ahead. Look at us. Look at us, it's so incredible. Usopp was crying with awe. The cut, the sea, itself, the strength of, the Elbaf warriors, is amazing. The Mary hit the water, and by this point the island was almost out of their sight. But they could still just make out the voices of the giants behind them yelling out one last thing to them. Friends. Go, good luck. Usopp declared to the others that he will go to Elbaf someday, to one day see the village of warriors. Luffy and Usopp were both singing and dancing on the Mary's railing about the giants of Elbaf with Karoo running in circles behind them. Nami leaned up against the mast, looking a little red in the face, fore. Finally, the duo slipped and almost fell off the railing, but it didn't faze them. They were still laughing the whole time. Sanji was inside making some snacks while Zoro was lifting a set of weights that were even bigger than he was. His ankles were heavily bandaged. All in all, it was a pretty normal day. Soon, Sanji came out with a whole platter of sweets for the girls before snipping at the boys that there was more food inside when they began drooling over the plate. They went climbing up the stairs like a group of monkeys and they followed them to see them tearing into the food like pigs at a trough. Disgusting, Sanji hissed as he came in and began working on the dishes. He always said that he would beat some manners into them, but it seemed that no matter what he did, it just wasn't good enough to get through those thick skulls. They all stopped what they were doing though, because Vivi was suddenly shouting at them from outside, and her voice sounded close to panicking. Hey everyone, come quick. The men went to the door to see what the matter was. Luffy called to Vivi, with a mouthful of food. What's wrong, Vivi? Are you okay? Nami has an awful fever. Vivi shouted. Sanji knocked Usopp and Luffy out of his way and screamed in terror. What, Nami's sick? Nami was lying on the deck and breathing hard, as if it hurt to take a single breath. Her face was a bright red and already she was starting to break out in a cold sweat. Vivi had the boys carefully bring Nami down below deck, after giving Zoro the eternal pose, and they did what they could to try and help. The best that they could do was to make her a little more comfortable as her fever continued to rise. Sanji was crying his eyes out, looking heartbroken, while Vivi wet a towel in a bowl of water. It's most likely the climate, Vivi said as she laid the cloth across Nami's forehead. It's quite normal. See, sailors in the Grand Line aren't used to the change in weather and can become quite ill. There are countless stories of tough, notorious pirates who suddenly died. Vivi explained to the others that because of the changing climates, a person's immune system was ravaged by colds and fevers until they just couldn't take it anymore. And she also warned that even the slightest cold could be deadly if they weren't careful. As Sanji cried out in despair, Vivi quickly asked if there was anyone on board who knew anything about medicine. Wordlessly, Luffy and Usopp both pointed to Nami, and that was when everyone knew that they were in worse shape than they first thought. Vivi looked anxiously as she smoothed out Nami's blankets. "Well, when you're sick, eating lots of meat always helps, right Sanji?" Luffy suddenly asked their cook. Sanji sniffled a little as he looked to Luffy and answered him. "Meat is protein, and that does give the body energy to operate properly. I can cook some food to give her energy, but there's no guarantee that it'll cure her. I'm not a doctor." He looked to Nami sadly and went on in a forlorn way, "Besides, if my cooking made that big a difference, she'd never get sick. I put 100 times more care in preparing her meals than I do for you losers." He finished, "I feed Nami fresh meats and vegetables to ensure balanced diet. Anything that's rotten or moldy," he pointed to them, "goes to you." "Jerk!" Usopp exclaimed, slapping his hand. Luffy proclaimed that Sanji's food still tasted good to him. "My point, as long as I'm this ship's cook, nobody's going to feed Nami better in terms of nutrition," Sanji said firmly. "I can do anything in the kitchen, still, I do know that there are specific foods for different kinds of illnesses. But I can't make that call. She needs to be diagnosed by a doctor who'll tell us how to help her." "Just feed her everything that we got," Luffy suggested. Sanji was just telling him that she was too sick to eat as Vivi checked her temperature and gasped out that she had a fever of 104. "There's bound to be doctors and nurses in Alabasta that can help, right?" Usopp asked anxiously as Vivi leaned back on her knees. "How much longer till we get there, Vivi?" Vivi thought it all over, trying to think of a way out of this mess as she confessed, "I don't know, at least a week, and that's too long." "Kay, she's sick. Maybe we're overreacting?" Luffy asked the other two. "I don't know, I've never been sick," Usopp and Sanji answered together, tilting their heads in confusion. "Just what are you people?" Vivi screamed at them wildly. "This is serious, she shouldn't have such a high fever unless her body's fighting an infection. This is bad. Whatever's wrong, it's possibly life-threatening." Those words put the entire room into an uproar as the three men freaked out. "You mean Nami's gonna die?" Luffy screamed in horror, while Sanji broke down sobbing and Usopp running around in circles in panic. "Your screams aren't helping," Vivi yelled. "We have to find a doctor to help Nami before she dies." Luffy screamed loudly, his words almost being drowned out by Sanji's sobs. "Okay. Everyone just calm down," Vivi commanded. "You're only going to make her feel worse." But then a weak voice spoke up. It was so quiet that it was hardly heard over the noise, but it was enough to calm everyone as they looked to Nami. "Listen," she whispered, and she slowly sat up. "I'm fine." "Nami?" Vivi asked worriedly. "Oh, she's cured?" Luffy cheered happily before Usopp hit him over the head and screamed at him to shut up. Nami, however, was breathing hard as she pushed the cloth away and told Vivi to look in her desk for a newspaper. Once she found it, it turned out that their situation was worse than they ever thought. Apparently, 300,000 of Alabasta's imperial soldiers had defected and joined the rebel army, so that now the rebels outnumbered the soldiers and the tide has changed. But the worst bit of news was that Nami confessed that she had been hiding the paper from them for the last 3 days. Hearing that devastated Vivi so that she fell to her knees, looking ready to cry. "I'm sorry I didn't say something earlier," Nami told her softly. "We can't change our speed, so I didn't want to worry you. There's nothing anyone can do right now." She looked to Luffy and asked, "You understand, Luffy?" Luffy looked like he was trying to figure out a really hard math problem before he said, "Things are bad and they're beyond our control?" "That sunk in better than I hoped," Nami said with a smile like a teacher who was just given the right answer from a difficult student. But Usopp was insisting that they take her to a doctor, which Nami dismissed, stating that no one has a temperature that high and that she probably had a little heat stroke. She got out of bed, but it was clear to them that it seemed to take a lot of effort as she got up. Merely stating that she appreciated their concern to get to Alabasta as she walked up the stairs with some effort. There was a long silence in the room as they watched her go. "Wow, she recovered fast?" Luffy asked in confusion. "No," Usopp hissed at him, "she's faking." Vivi, meanwhile, was still on her knees and staring at the paper. Now that this conflict has escalated, even more blood will be shed throughout the kingdom. We're at war, she whispered tearfully as she looked at it. If I don't put a stop to this insanity, the entire kingdom of Alabasta will be doomed. Crocodile will move in and seize control. She crumpled the paper and cried out desperately. You're trying to get me home safely, but there's no time. I need to get home as quickly as possible. If I don't make it back in time, 1,000,000 innocent citizens will give their lives needlessly. There are 1,000,000 people there? Luffy gasped. Wow. What a horrible burden you have to carry. I'm sorry, Sanji said to her sympathetically, as she cried. Just then they heard Zoro's voice from outside yelling at them to hurry up and get on deck. Sanji began telling Zoro off for the orders, but Zoro replied that they were to shut up because Nami told them to chance course. For those who weren't here, they couldn't understand why, because the weather was perfect. The wind, Nami said, without looking at them. They looked confused as she went on. There's a powerful wind, and it's heading right this way. She turned, but Luffy was there, checking her forehead for a fever. Luffy hollered in pain because her fever was so hot that it hurt his hand. He began giving her orders to get back to bed while they found a doctor for her. Instead, she got angry and began yelling at them all that she was just fine. But they were all giving her worried looks, none of them, not even Luffy, buying that for a minute. Even Sanji was actually backing Luffy up, trying to convince her to just go lie down, but she finally lost her temper and screamed at them until they got the message. But their attention was drawn back to the scene as Vivi came charging out of the door and begging them to listen. They looked up as she called, I had to ask you all a favor. As a passenger on your ship, it's not my place to ask this, but I have no choice. My homeland is in jeopardy of being destroyed, so I would really appreciate it if we could move even faster. Every minute that I'm out here puts more of my people in danger of losing their lives. We need to head to Alabasta at full speed. The men were all looking at her with hard expressions. Of course we will, Nami said agreeably, just like we promised. Vivi smiled and suggested that they hurry up and find a doctor. After all, the only way they could move top speed was to get Nami healthy as soon as possible. Right, Luffy called out, smiling in approval. No one makes this ship move like Nami. Everyone agreed and Nami thanked her as she tried to walk over to her. She apologized, just before she fainted. Luffy then screamed, what the heck is that? They looked to see what he was talking about. Usopp screamed as well. Not too far away, an enormous cyclone had appeared out of nowhere. One so big and large that it towered over them, as large as the giants on Little Garden. The lightning flashed and the wind was so strong that even though they were far enough away not to have to worry about getting sucked in, the Mary was tossed around like a toy in a bathtub. It's a cyclone, Vivi screamed. It's huge, yelled Luffy, hanging onto the mast. The Straw Hats yelled at how close a call that was, as the storm was exactly where they were originally headed. If they hadn't changed course when they did, they'd be dead right about now. The lightning got harsher and they hung on as Luffy yelled that they barely missed it before he yelled that they were to find Nami a doctor no matter what, and that was when it all faded. After clearing the storm, the first thing they saw was of a gentle snowfall around them. Usopp, Zoro, and Luffy were all on deck, the first two wrapped in tight blankets. See any doctors yet? Luffy yelled up to Zoro. Luffy, you can't be serious, Usopp whispered to him as Zoro called down what they thought about people standing on water. Luffy and Usopp asked what he meant. Instead of an answer, he told them to look ahead and they all did. And it was just as he said. A man was standing on the water directly in front of them. For standing there was a tall man with wavy lips and a sad expression. He looked a great deal like a jester with his green-blue costume. Luffy asked Usopp if he thought that he was a doctor, causing a massive case of the face palms. The man began talking about how chilly the weather was to the Straw Hats. Suddenly, the water underneath the man rose up suddenly. A wave so big that it almost overturned the Mary. With that, a large round ship had rose up beneath them like a submarine would. It had large steel plating around the ship, with a star-like pattern. Two large gears are seen towards the side of the ship in the form of a giant hippo wearing a crown as its bow. There were hundreds of men on board and the pirate flag held a skull with a tongue out and a crown on its head. The men jumped on board the Mary and threatened to shoot as they held the three men at gunpoint, though only Usopp looked scared. Just then two more men showed up with the jester guy they saw a moment ago. The first was a man wearing a long, orange cloak, with gloves that cover all fingers but his thumb, and resemble an afro each. He also had a large black afro on his head, and 3 small ones on his beard. A heavy, overweight man with dark violet and a cylinder-shaped jaw made up of tin plates was standing there as he enjoyed a large slab of meat on the end of a knife. He was dressed in tin plate armor and a hooded cape that made this guy look a bit like a hippo. The fat man, who the crew members called Wapol, stood on the Mary, watching the whole thing with a bored expression, as if he could think of a million places he'd rather be, as he watched them all. Just then, the cabin door shot open and Sanji came running out, demanding to know what was going on. Sanji saw that they had guests. But rather than be concerned, he casually lit a match for his cigarette before he asked again coolly, "So, what's going on here?" Luffy looked up. "Well, we're under attack, and it's still snowing." "Well yeah," Sanji stated patiently as he looked to the guns with mild interest. "The guns pointed at my face kinda gave it away. What's next?" Wapol continued to chew a chunk of meat off his knife. "You all consider yourself a band of pirates?" he asked. "That's amusing. I only count 4 of ya." He then bit down on the blade, breaking it with his teeth. The Straw Hats all cringed as he chewed up the knife and swallowed the whole thing like it was a cracker. Wapol finished up the knife and added, "So strange, that your group would have so few members." That's just weird," Luffy said as they all stared at him. "What kind of guy likes to eat knives?" "And that's a lot coming from someone who eats almost anything he can catch," Sanji added, looking at him. "Alright," Wapol said, still chewing, "I'll keep this simple. See, my men here and I wish to travel to Drum Kingdom. You wouldn't happen to have an eternal pose or a log pose, would ya?" Sanji told him a straight no, that they never even heard of Drum. Luffy then told Wapol to leave because they were in a hurry. The Wapol merely shrugged, not at all surprised that they didn't have anything, but he didn't seem upset. Instead, he said that he would settle for their treasure and their ship. And to their amazement, his jaw spread wide enough as he went and bit down on the ship's side. "He's a ship-eating monster," Usopp yelled terrified as he pulled off a huge chunk of wood and began swallowing it. "Hey, our ship isn't your lunch," Luffy yelled out, and the men all pointed their guns at them, warning him to stay quiet. Luffy, of course, took them both out. As the men all prepared to fire, the monster control, taking out all the guards with no effort at all. The whole time, Wapol was eating the side of the ship. Luffy came charging over, just as Wapol clamped his mouth down on him, swallowing him whole. But the man's mouth was suddenly wrenched open wide, revealing Luffy in the form of an elephant. The pachyderm's large body being too large for even the mouthman's jaws allowed Luffy to easily escape. With an annoyed huff, Luffy turned around and raised one of his back legs for a kick. Just before he attacked, Vivi came out this time, demanding to know what was going on, but arrived in time to see Luffy send him flying, screaming out for him to just leave. The men were all staring with their jaws open as they watched Wapol become a star in the sky. Freaking out, they all climbed back onto the ship and immediately went off to try and save him. "This is far from over," the jester, whose name was Chess, yelled, pointing a finger at them. "You'll pay. I promise you'll pay." A few days later, the crew was back in Nami's room. Nami's face was a bright red and she seemed to be struggling for breath as she tried to breathe. Luffy and Zoro were there keeping a close watch on her when suddenly they could hear Sanji's voice calling out from above deck, "Island dead ahead." Luffy looked up, looking thrilled. "Are you serious?" he cried happily, before he looked to Nami. "Oh, an island. We found an island. Hey Nami, did you hear that? This means we can get you a real doctor. He'll fix you up." He then chanted that she should wake up, but Zoro told him to go up and that he'll watch her. Luffy didn't need to be told twice as he almost went skipping up to the deck. It was an island covered completely with white snow with several tall mountains that looked like tall cylinders covered with ice and snow, almost like drums. The tops of them were completely flat and they towered over everything on the island, casting shadows across the landscape. Luffy began to scream excitedly as he ran up to jump onto the Mary's head and was yelling at the others. "There it is. Nami's saved." It was at this point that he noticed the white powder falling from the sky. "Alright. It's snow," Luffy yelled with stars in his eyes, "an island of snow." "Whoa, Luffy, wait. Just so that there's no misunderstanding between us," Sanji called loudly, We're stopping to find Nami a doctor. We're not here to have an adventure, are we clear? But Luffy wasn't even listening as he went on to say how much he loved snow, and Sanji rolled his eyes, knowing that there wasn't any point going on when he got like this. Hold on, Usopp asked, shivering from the freezing weather. You sure this is a good idea? There could be snow monsters. Besides, we don't even know if there's people there or not. Oh no, he gasped, his hand over his heart. I'm having a relapse of my don't go to the island disease. Snow, it's so white, it's beautiful, Luffy continued to say dreamily as he looked at the sparkling snow while Sanji just shook his head at them. Luffy looked ready to jump off the ship once they neared the shore and heading inland along a river. Sanji was staring up at the mountains in wonder. Look at the mountains, he said. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. But then Usopp was asking Luffy if he was cold dressed like that, and he looked back in confusion, as if wondering what he was talking about. It's 10 degrees below zero, Vivi added, that's when bears get ready to hibernate. Luffy was silent for a moment, as if this thought was being processed, and then, it's cold, he cried out, shivering where he sat, and both Sanji and Usopp yelled at him, you just figured that out. The small ship continued onwards, deeper into the island. The snow shone so brightly that it was almost painful to look at. So far they hadn't seen anyone else, but there was the lingering feeling of being watched. Soon, Vivi had spotted what seemed like a good place to anchor as Zoro called to them all, "'Kay guys, Dr. Search. Who wants in? Guess we gotta find people here first." Luffy, who was now wearing a coat that added protection to the layer of fur he now had raised over most of his body, raised his hand. "I'm in." "Me too," Sanji exclaimed. "Fine, go have fun," Usopp yelled in the background. But then someone yelled out, "That's far enough, pirate." At the voice, their heads jerked up to see that they had been surrounded on all sides on the cliffs, by several dozen people at least. Though they looked like ordinary citizens, they were all armed and looked ready to fight. "People? Well, that was easy," Luffy said, not sounding concerned. Usopp looked around nervously, and informed Luffy that they didn't look friendly. Suddenly, a man stepped forward. He was a large and rather imposing man, with slicked black hair and a slight goatee. He was dressed in a long white fur-lined green tunic and armor plates on his arms, with an extra-large spade in a sheath hanging on his back, and the way that the people all gathered around him, it was clear that he was the leader. "I'll only say this once. Your kind is not welcomed here. Leave immediately," the man, who the Straw Hats heard was named Dalton, called. "We only came here to find a doctor," Luffy yelled. "We have someone who's sick," Vivi yelled pleadingly. "You'll have to do better than that. We won't fall for that old trick," someone shouted. "This is our island," another person yelled, holding up his gun. "We won't let any filthy pirates land here." Soon everyone screamed for them to leave or else they'll blow them out of the water. "That's great. We barely said hello, and they already hate us," Sanji said cheerily. "Get out of here," a person yelled at him as he shot near his feet, startling them all. "Big mistake," Sanji growled, looking ready to fight as Vivi moved to stop him from acting recklessly, but in the end, that same man lost his head as he fired again. This time he struck Vivi in the shoulder. "Vivi!" Luffy screamed. He turned towards the shooter, completely enraged. "Why you?" They all held up their weapons, looking ready to fire on them all. Luffy looked ready to take them all out, but then Vivi got up and stopped him by his waist, holding him back, even as the blood rushed down her arm. "Stop it," Vivi pleaded. "Fighting is not going to help anything." Luffy glared at Vivi as she tried to tell him that she was alright, that it was only a graze. She then lowered her head to the deck and cried out, "As you wish, we will not dock here. But please, will you summon a doctor? Our friend is suffering with a severe illness. Please help her, I beg you." Luffy looked dumbfounded. "Vivi, you don't deserve to be captain," Vivi stated harshly without lifting her head. "We can't get into a fight here." Luffy's expression was void of all emotions as he merely looked at her as she continued to beg for help. "Think about Nami. What will happen to her?" Vivi asked him. Luffy looked back to the townspeople and seemed to come to a difficult conclusion. "Yeah, right, I'm sorry about that," he said softly. He fell to his knees next to Vivi and bowed his head just like she did, his hat flying off as he also asked for help that they bring a doctor. The townspeople merely looked on for a few agonizing seconds before Dalton said, "I'll show you to our village. They all looked up at him as he turned. Follow me. See, just ask politely, Vivi said in a know-it-all voice before they got ready to depart. They soon found themselves in a small, but warm house. There was a roaring fire going in the fireplace while Luffy, Usopp, Sanji, and Vivi were all gathered around Nami's bed with Dalton there, and he even passed them a few warm drinks. Dalton then started to speak to them as he pointed to the window. Those mountains out there are known as the Drum Rockies. Look closely. Do you see the castle on top of the tallest one? The one in the middle? Barely making out the structure, Usopp questioned Dalton about the castle. That castle has lost its king, Dalton explained. Yeah, IG said as he looked as well. But Vivi was asking what was so important about the castle. That castle is where this land's only doctor lives, Dalton informed them. Dr. Kureha. She's the one who the people here call a witch. What? Sanji cried out. Of all places, why does she live on top of a mountain? We need to call her here right now. Nami needs her help. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid there's no way to contact her, Dalton answered, and he truly sounded sorry here. Sanji growled in frustration. You can't be serious. What kind of doctor is she? Dalton explained that her medical skills are actually impressive, but that she was also nearly 140 years old. 140? Sanji repeated. No wonder she doesn't get around much. Dalton just explained that she likes pickled plums as Vivi asked what the people here do if they get sick or injured. She comes down from the mountain whenever she feels like it, Dalton explained. She looks around for patients, treats them, and before she leaves, she takes whatever she wants from their houses as payment. She doesn't sound like a very nice lady, Usopp said. It kinda sounds like she's a pirate, Luffy added. But how is a woman as old as she is capable of getting down that mountain? Vivi asked, not understanding something like that. Dalton seemed to think it over for a moment before he confessed. It's an odd rumor around here, but several of the villagers have claimed to have seen her at night riding a sleigh of some kind through the sky. They see her silhouette when the moon is out. That's the reason she is thought to be a witch. There are others who say they've seen her with a strange creature, a creature none of them recognize, Dalton added, and Usopp seemed to freak out about snow monsters. Dr. Kureha is the only doctor we have, but she's still a woman I would prefer to stay away from, Dalton warned. All we can do is wait for the next time she decides to come down the mountain. Vivi and Sanji were both exclaiming that they couldn't wait that long. But Luffy got up from the floor and went over to Nami as he began to gently slap her face, trying to wake her up. Hey Nami? Nami. Wake up now, Luffy asked. Luffy, you idiot, what are you doing to her? The other three yelled at him. But Nami slowly opened her eyes and she looked over at him. Hey, look, she's awake, Luffy exclaimed to them before he looked back to her and explained, here's the thing. The only way to see the doctor is to climb the mountain. So, we're gonna have to climb a mountain. Nami's face turned to one of great surprise while Sanji shouted out, are you crazy? What about Nami? How do you intend to get her up? Easy, she'll ride on my back, Luffy answered. That's only going to make her even more sick, Vivi yelled at him angrily. What's the problem? I thought we needed to hurry, Luffy said, not understanding what the problem was. We do, but you'll never make it up there, Vivi yelled, pointing out the window at the mountain. Look at how steep and tall that thing is. I can do it, Luffy said confidently. Maybe you can, but climbing that thing will be way too hard on Nami, Sanji exclaimed. Yeah, but look, even if we fall or something we'll land in snow, Luffy said indifferently. That doesn't matter. A fall like that will kill even a healthy person, Vivi yelled out, and acting like that ended the matter. Even Usopp was backing them up, arguing that Nami's fever was too serious and that she's almost dying. Let him do it, the voice had come from Nami started to groan in bed, and like before, the entire room fell silent as they looked over at her. I need to get over this thing, and quickly. We need to hurry, for Vivi. Still breathing hard, she pulled her hand out from under the covers and held it up as she forced a smile. Come on, Captain. Let's go. The other three stared at them, dumbfounded. Even Dalton was looking at her in surprise. Luffy grinned back at her and gave her a high five that reminded them when Arlong Park fell and she had given back the straw hat. Even back to when they first met and she agreed to join up with him for a while. That's what I'm talking about. Leave it to me, he promised as they got ready to leave for a dangerous journey, again. Soon they were all standing outside Dalton's house. Luffy was carrying Nami on his back as he took the form of a mountain goat as Vivi was tying a cloth around them to help make sure she stayed on. While Dalton was surprised at the boy's transformation, he easily accepted it as he explained that he was a Zoan fruit user himself, having the ox fruit model, Bison. Sanji sighed a little as he watched them. How he wished that he had offered to carry Nami Swan up like this. He was sure that he would have made the journey a lot more comfortable for her than that animal-brained captain. "You know you're in no shape for a trip like this, Nami," he told her, but she was already sleeping like a baby. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" Vivi asked worriedly. "It'll take you hours to get there." Luffy didn't answer that as he looked to Dalton and asked for some meat for the road, and he looked at him in bewilderment. Sanji declared that he would go with them to make sure that they got up there in one piece as Usopp warned Luffy that he couldn't fall, not even once, or Nami will die. Vivi finished tying Nami on and told them that she would stay behind because she would only slow them down. Usopp nodded in agreement as Luffy told Nami to hang on tight and they looked ready to start running. "I guess you're set on going," Dalton said. "I'm not going to try and stop you, but I will ask that you climb up from the other side. That way you can avoid the Lapons on this side. They're fierce carnivorous rabbits. You run into a pack of them, you're as good as dead." Luffy was reassuring him that they'll be fine as he looked to Sanji, who agreed firmly. "You can't be serious," Dalton said loudly. "Do you know how easily those things can kill you?" "Nah, we'll be alright," Luffy said confidently as he took off, calling back to Sanji, "Now hurry it up, Sanji, before Nami dies." The blonde cook looked annoyed, yelling after him, "Don't say things like that, you idiot. You wanna jinx us?" And so they took off. It was already starting to snow with the wind picking up quickly so that it was difficult to see anything in front of them. But they could still see the main mountain in front of them as they made a straight beeline for that, leaving nothing but deep imprints in the snow behind them.